All right, good morning. I'd like to call to order the July MTA board meeting, which is being held jointly with the Metro North Railroad and Long Island Railroad Committee, New York City Transit Committee, Bridges and Tunnels Committee, Finance Committee, Capital Program Oversight Committee, Safety Committee, Audit Committee, and Corporate Governance Committee. We are conducting this board meeting remotely via WebEx and conference call. Governor Cuomo's Executive Order 202.1, which has subsequently been extended, suspends the open meetings law requirements and accordingly any provisions in the MTA's bylaws regarding public attendance at meetings, and board members participating and voting by phone are also suspended. Now I'd like to ask Tom Quigley, our General Counsel, to do the official roll call for the record. Tom.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Board members, I'll now do the official roll call in alphabetical order. When I call your name, please verbally indicate your presence. If your microphone is on mute, please unmute it to indicate that you are here. I see that Chairman Foy is in attendance. Commissioner Albert.
Here.
Commissioner Barbas.
Present.
Commissioner Borelli.
Present.
Commissioner Brown.
Present.
Commissioner Brown.
Present.
Commissioner Calisi.
Present.
Commissioner Cortez Vasquez. Commissioner Cortez Vasquez. Commissioner Fleischer.
Present.
Commissioner Glucksman.
Here.
Commissioner Herman.
Here.
Commissioner Jones.
Here.
Commissioner Lacey.
Here.
Commissioner Law.
Here.
Commissioner Lynn.
Here.
Commissioner Mack. Commissioner Mack.
He was just here.
He was just here.
Lars.
Thank you. Commissioner Mahaltas.
I'm here.
Commissioner Mojica. Commissioner Mojica. Commissioner Samuelson.
Here.
Commissioner Schwartz.
Here.
Commissioner Tessitore.
Here.
And last but certainly not least, Commissioner Zuckerman.
Here, very kind of you, Tom.
Thank you, Commissioner. One more time for Commissioner Cortez Vasquez and Commissioner Mojica. Mr. Chairman, we have a quorum.
Did you log me in?
Yes, Commissioner Mack, we have you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Later in the meeting, agency presidents and staff will submit procurements and actions for a vote. Your presence at this meeting and silence at the time of a vote will be considered an affirmative vote for the record. If you would like to vote no or abstain, please state your name and state your vote. We will now move into our virtual comment period. As with the prior month's meetings, speakers were able to register on Monday and send in their comments. We'll play public comments now for 30 minutes and make the full public comment video available online.
Good morning, everyone. We have 37 members of the public registered to speak today. The first 30 minutes of public comment will be delivered at the board meeting, and the remainder will be posted online for the public and board members to review on July 22nd. I would like to remind our speakers that, in the interest of time and fairness to all speakers, we limit everyone to 2 minutes. Please be aware that there will be a warning beep to remind you when you have 30 seconds left to conclude your remarks. Thank you for your patience and understanding throughout the virtual comment session. The next speaker is Alita Dupree.
Good morning, MTA Board, Chair Pat Foy and members. Alita Dupree for the record. My pronouns are she and her. It's good to be back with you again. I appreciate your continued work with Omni Fare Payment, seeing that the Bronx has been activated. Let's get some of these stations in Manhattan turned on, such as 57th Street and 7th Avenue. It's important to continue the work of accessibility I did read in the Transit Committee book that you're doing some work with signage and wayfinding at Grand Central Terminal. This is very, very important because I would like to know where all of the elevators and escalators are in Grand Central Terminal, especially if I need to go down to the lower level, because I want everyone to be able to use the system fully. I am concerned about electricity. And while the subway is all electric, I read that the power that you receive from the Power Authority comes mostly from a natural gas facility in Queens. And while we are avoiding many other emissions because people aren't driving, I think we need to build a renewable energy-powered subway. And it's going to take some time. Contracts can't be undone very quickly, and there's more than just buying unbundled renewable energy credits, but I think we need to have a subway powered by wind and solar. Grand Central is essential. It's a place that means a lot to me. I heard a song by George Harrison called Blow Away, and when I heard it, I was reminded of my first visit to Grand Central Terminal. It is a place near and dear to me where I discovered things bigger than myself, and it is legendary. So continue the work again in your meeting of building a better MTA that lives up to the concept of being legendary. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Roy Fishman.
Thank you. Good morning to everyone. I'd like to note that all other New York City boroughs have bicycle access to each other on their bridges. I want to know, why can't the Verrazano? In this pandemic, when many want to bicycle to avoid mass transit, I think it's imperative that we allow at least one lane on the Verrazano to be used to allow cyclists and pedestrians to get across, even if it's on a limited basis. And I think there should be a test run to see how it works. So again, I feel that to allow commuting during this pandemic and hopefully following the pandemic, commuters should be allowed access to the bridge, to the Verrazano Bridge, at least one lane to commute and for recreational purposes. Thank you.
The next speaker is Matt Camper.
Good morning, MTA Board. My name is Matt Camper. I am Regional Director for the Long Island Railroad for Package Unite. And first of all, I want to thank all the MTA employees, including all the Long Island Railroad employees, workers, everybody out there who have been helping us get through this pandemic. It has really been, you are without a doubt the true heroes of this crisis, and keeping us moving forward, and most importantly, making sure that, you know, this economy gets back on track. Second of all, in regards to the Long Island Railroad itself, I am very happy to see all the work that the Long Island Railroad has been undertaking, taking advantage of this time, getting work that maybe wouldn't be able to get done otherwise, including concrete tie projects along the Ronkonkoma branch and now the Port Washington branch between Woodside and Metzwill's Point. Absolutely incredible to see what the railroad has done, and thanks to President Bill Ang and his entire team from the railroad for all they have done throughout this time and getting all the work done. And lastly, I want to mention that in regard to the Rutgers Tube rehabilitation project, I am in full support of that design build services proposal. It's desperately needed at Rutgers, and I am very happy to see that it's finally going to get done. The last subway tunnel in the entire system that needs to get fixed after Superstorm Sandy. So you have my full support on that as well. So that's it, and thank you so much.
The next speaker is Jason Anthony.
Good morning, MTA. I'm the Vice President of Passengers United, organization that represents riders throughout the region. I was recently in Washington, D.C., riding the Washington Metro, and I saw all the progress that they're doing in terms of track work, of platform renovation. And I wonder why New York City Transit doesn't do the same thing when the ridership is low due to the pandemic and due to COVID-19. And I want to issue also the overcrowding on the S40 and the M15. Two bus routes that I use, let's say frequently. These buses get overcrowded with little or none social distance. I want to see what Sarah Feinberg is going to do. And I'm in full support of the reversions of the Q70, M35, and the Rutgers Tube that is way overdue and needs to be done. So I'll do the balance of my time. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Charlton De Souza.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Charlton De Souza. I'm the president of Passengers United, and my concern has to do with the overnight subway service closure and the fact that there is no proper bus service. Many express bus routes like the X68, the QM6 has been cut. So what I would like to know is, why is it for the last 2 months I have been back and forth communication with the MTA and have received very little to no response about having the Long Island Railroad cross honor at all Zone 3 stations overnight from at least 12:30 to about 5 a.m. So many people are being impacted. And what I don't understand is you guys are paying $41 to put people in a cab overnight. But why not just cross honor at all Zone 3 stations? The way the system works now, if you get on the railroad at Penn Station, you have to get off at Jamaica and take a bus. You're not allowed to stay on the train. You have to pay $3.50, or you have to pay up to a $12 fine. This makes no sense. And also, my other concern has to do with the lack of bus service. But I'm also very upset with Sarah Feinberg because a lot of people on the subway are not wearing masks. And every day I have to tell people to put their mask on. This is ridiculous. And, you know, we lost over 145 transit workers who have passed away and died. And I feel that, you know, New York City Transit has to get the police involved. If necessary, bring in the state troopers, bring in the National Guard, or have teams of volunteers on trains giving out masks and bringing the compliance rate up to 100%. Because right now, the compliance rate is like 65 to like 60%. And you're putting your employees in danger. You're putting the passengers in danger. It's not right. Everyone should have a mask on in the train. There should be hand sanitizer. And most of all, the homeless on the trains should have a mask on, or they should be asked to leave. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Our next speaker will be Lisa Daglian.
Greetings. I'm Lisa Daglian, Executive Director for Permanent Citizens Advisory Committee to the MTA, PCAC. Today, we bid a sad adieu to Subway's SVP, Sally Librera. Sally is a consummate transit professional whose strong and thoughtful leadership made a real impact on the lives of millions of daily subway riders. She led the impressive turnaround of a subway system that was at its lowest point in decades to become an envied transit network. Sally oversaw such significant efforts as safe sessions, transition of the 7 line to CPTC, transformation of the Staten Island Railroad, and played a major role in success of the SAP and in moving fast forward. Sally also had the complex and heart-wrenching role of steering her remarkable team through the COVID-19 pandemic, which shook the lives of too many transit workers and which saw 40% of the workforce out at one point. Despite running the nation's largest subway system, Sally took the time to listen to riders and implement their suggestions, including developing performance metrics that reflect what riders care about most. Her legacy is solid, and on behalf of riders, we thank her and wish her well. The impressive system that Sally leaves behind is, however, in great danger if the MTA doesn't receive federal funding, to the tune of more than $10 billion through the end of next year. These funds are an investment in the future health of the region and the millions of riders who rely on the transit system that will allow us to get back in business and looking forward to our next normal. That's going to take a while. In the meantime, we're looking forward to hearing more about the restoration of 24/7 subway service. We're particularly concerned about the 4 to 5 a.m. time period, which has the heaviest overnight usage and growing. What lessons were learned about cleaning that can keep riders safe and reduce closure time? When can we expect a reopening plan? As riders come back to the system, it's critical that there's a robust system to which they can return, one that reduces crowding at every opportunity. Thank you.
The next speaker is Andy Pollock.
Good morning, Chairman Foy, and good morning, members of the board. I'm Andy Pollock. I am the Public Advisor to Passengers United. Couple things. Number one, to the Long Island Railroad. They had a challenge a couple weekends ago with the threat of Tropical Storm Faye. We were getting very worried that the bridge at New High Park Road was not going to get installed, despite the fact that we did get tropical storm-like conditions that weekend. The Long Island Railroad was successful in eliminating the grade crossing and putting in the bridge to support the third track. And I'm very glad to see consistency in the committee book for more projects coming up in August and in September. Many of you know we are going into a recess next month, so I'm glad the LIRR was transparent on the projects going into September, and more importantly, a new schedule starting the day after Labor Day. Second, I want to address New York City Transit. We are eventually going to see ridership go up within the next couple of months. Hopefully, we will get to the restoration of 24/7 subway service back in the fall. And hopefully today, since, again, we are going into an August recess, I hope that President Feinberg will be giving the exact date of when fare collection will resume on buses. Long Island Railroad should hopefully have cash collection back sooner or later because Metro North's doing it. But other than that, thank you all very much. Enjoy your recess, and I will see you all in September.
Our next speaker will be Vincent Modaferri.
Good morning, Chairman Foy and distinguished board members. My name is Vincent Modaferri, and I am the president of the Transit Supervisors Organization. We represent over 900 hardworking and dedicated frontline supervisors in the Department of Buses. As you are aware, since June, the MTA has refused to meet with us to continue negotiations on our outstanding 28-month contract. This refusal to bargain has left us with no other choice but to recently file for impasse. For those of you who were not around in 2011, this is the same bargaining position taken by then MTA Chairman Jay Walder in the aftermath of the 2008 Great Recession. The MTA argued at that time that due to the financial impact caused by the Great Recession, they should not be bound by the wage pattern set by Local 100. This decision in 2011 left 6 unions, us being one of them, with no other choice but to file for impasse. This resulted in 3 very long and costly interest arbitration proceedings. Throughout those proceedings, the MTA paid the law firm Proskauer Rose hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal fees to represent them. But in the end, the MTA lost each and every arbitration decision. In all these cases, the arbitrators upheld the long-standing and fundamental doctrine of pattern bargaining and rejected the MTA's arguments on their ability to pay the raises set by Local 100. As the late, great arbitrator George Nicolau opined in the ATU award, it's the ability to pay, not the desire to pay. The term of our 28-month contract is September 1st, 2018 through December 31st, 2020. The 2 pattern raises in this agreement have already been budgeted and accounted for in the 2018 and 2019 MTA budgets. In both those fiscal years, the MTA ended up with year-end cash surpluses that were carried over to the following budget years. These raises also predate the pandemic and the financial calamity as caused on the 2020 and 2021 MTA budgets. Therefore, even though the MTA may not have the desire to pay these wage increases, we believe there is no question that the MTA does have the ability to pay these raises. On May,
your remarks.
All right, I'm wrapping up. On May 16th, the MTA approved 2 4.25% in wage increases and pay tens of millions of dollars in back pay to Local 100's 40,000 members, but 2 weeks later reassess their bargaining position for our 900 members. We think this is a little hypocritical and will further weaken any future ability to pay arguments the MTA is planning to make in interest arbitration. In closing, I am asking the board to reevaluate your position on this 28-month contract. As history has proven, this is a losing strategy and will end up wasting precious resources at a time when the MTA cannot afford to waste a single dollar. Thank you.
The next speaker is Andy Quito.
Hey, good afternoon. I'm Andy Quito. I'm the social media part of Passengers United, and I want to bring on a couple of things regarding the Long Island Railroad. I just checked the committee book. It says that we're going to have more work on the main line in a couple of weeks. But here's the thing. Why is shuttle buses not being provided? Me and my fellow contributors have been asking for shuttle buses for all this time, and then nothing gets done. It's more time-consuming for And second, I want to bring up the situation with New York City Transit at Jamaica Center. The situation with the swipers is out of control. Yesterday, while I was going into Manhattan, I saw swipers trying to vandalize a machine at Jamaica Center and offering people swipes. And then when I was coming back around 7 o'clock in the evening, I saw them using a MetroCard to open up the emergency gate. Why is there no police at Jamaica Center? We've been asking them for so many months, and we still got homeless people roaming the station on the subway. This is the reason why people have to take the bus on the weekends and overnight, because we don't want to be assaulted. We don't want to be harassed by the homeless people. And you should think about restoring 24/7 subway service, because the buses are not showing up. There's lack of drivers. People are being stranded everywhere, and not everybody cannot afford taxi. And one last thing about Jamaica Center. The community has been asking if we want a mural painting at Jamaica Center for the honor of Naya Rivera, who drowned last week. The community is asking for a mural at Jamaica Center. That's all I got to say. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Our next speaker will be John Caserta.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. I'm a bus operator, Staten Island, ATU 726. We've been going on now a few months without a contract. Ever since the pandemic started back in early March, everything was fine and dandy. The kids, they were happy. Going into late March, they started worrying, Daddy, are you going to die like everybody else is dying? Are you going to get the coronavirus? I feel hazard pay is a definite for the MTA bus operators, due to the fact that what we have to do every day going to and from work. Hand sanitizers, Clorox wipes, Lysol. I disinfect my car. I keep my shoes off when I go home. I have to strip down to my butt naked into my apartment. This way I don't bring it into the house to the kids and the wife. Every day it's the same thing over and over again, just to protect my family, my children. It's not scary. I mean, it's very scary what we have to pick up in Staten Island and in the city. Homeless people, criminals, people who just want a free ride from one corner to the next. And if we enforce the mask wearing policy law, we get assaulted. The bus will get vandalized. It's our fault because we're not supposed to enforce the mask wearing policy. But I also want to protect myself from catching the virus and risk bringing it home to my kids. My kids are 8 years old and 4 years old. They should not have to worry about Daddy going home with the coronavirus and dying a few days later. Hazard pay and a contract is all we need. It's what we deserve. It's what we earned. We are heroes. We kept moving. We kept the city moving. We kept coming to work. And I spent my own money on Lysol, Clorox wipes, hand sanitizers, gloves, and anything else I could find. Thank you, and please, hazard pay.
Thank you. Our next speaker will be Rosalie Singerman-Ray.
Hello, my name is Rosalie Ray. I'm here on behalf of the Fare Free Transit Coalition. Thank you for having me. We urge that you join other enlightened cities and keep the fares on our local buses free. We also urge you to keep rear door boarding for now. There are several reasons why this makes sense for our city. First, rear door boarding keeps bus drivers safer in the midst of the pandemic. As Gothamist recently noted, over 130 MTA workers, at least 40 of them in the bus division, have died from COVID. Yes, our city has made great strides against the virus and our curve has flattened, but until there is a vaccine, New York City could once again become a hotspot and our drivers could get sick. You are the guardians in the first line of defense for MTA employees. You owe it to your workers to protect them from a lethal threat that has ebbed but has not gone away. Second, rear door boarding and de facto free buses have kept our city moving in a time of fear and lockdown. The New York Times recently described our buses and drivers as beacons and heroes during the pandemic. Buses which reach throughout the boroughs have carried essential workers in conditions that feel safer to riders. Third, free fares on buses make sense for our beleaguered family budgets. 1 out of 5 New York City residents is unemployed, and we have not yet felt the full force of the COVID recession. The free bus service is a lifeline, particularly given the city's decision to cut the budget for fare fares, which provides reduced fares for low-income users. Charging fares will not solve the MTA's fiscal problems. At best, using data from the National Transit Database, charging fares could bring in an estimated $500 million in revenue, as local bus ridership is down half since last year. If fares were charged and buses felt less safe, front door boarding resumed, it's probable even more riders would flee. The way out of the MTA's financial trouble should not come out of the pockets of bus riders. To ease the burden of the nation's largest transit system, we support the agency's ask for more support from the federal government. We in the Fare Free Transit Coalition are on your side and fighting to get what New Yorkers and the MTA deserve. Let's keep our free buses as a breath of fresh air. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker will be Rachel Foss.
Good morning. I'm Rachel Foss. I'm the Senior Research Analyst for reInvent Albany. We advocate for more transparent and accountable state government, including for authorities like the MTA. First, we would like to thank the staff of the MTA for their work and partnership in the efforts to secure desperately needed federal funds. We specifically thank Jano Lieber and his team for their important guidance. We'd also like to recognize Bob Ferrano for effectively conveying to the public how broke the MTA really is, including in an excellent op-ed in Bloomberg. reInvent Albany has been working with the MTA and numerous MTA stakeholders to make the case for federal support to the congressional delegation in New York. We want the MTA and the New York delegation to make clear that federal aid for the MTA is good for all of America. Our June report on MTA spending shows that $8 billion was paid to vendors in 46 states outside of New York from 2011 to 2018. This spending by New York State's MTA creates American jobs, a point we and the Daily News editorial board drove home in a July 11th op-ed and editorial. The state of the MTA's finances verges on the catastrophic. The MTA is in far worse shape than either the state or the city, with its $3.9 billion deficit this year and $6.6 billion deficit for 2021. Federal funding to plug these gaps is essential. The MTA's only alternatives to a huge infusion of federal aid are all terrible. The MTA can massively cut service or borrow enormous amounts to pay for operations in the hope that a miracle will happen. Cutting service or raising fares during an economic recession when 1 million New Yorkers have lost their jobs would be devastating. Borrowing for operating costs is simply unsustainable and will kick the MTA's financial problems down the road, creating even greater problems in the future. We urge the MTA to keep working hard to obtain federal approval of congestion pricing as well, which we strongly support. The MTA will need the $15 billion generated to maintain the system and continue pre-pandemic potential diversion of the Mass Transportation Operating Assistance Fund, which is dedicated to transit systems across the state. The MTOA account has $900 million in it that has not been dispersed, of which about 80% is dedicated to the MTA. Governor Cuomo has threatened a 20% cut to state funding, which by our reckoning would amount to about $150 million diverted from the MTA, what we would call a raid. We ask Governor Cuomo to respect the intent of dedicated funds by giving the MTA every dollar that has come in and not make any reductions through any upcoming budget adjustments. Dedicated funds are intended for the MTA, and the dedicated funds are intended for the MTA in good times and bad, and are especially important in this time of need. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. The next speaker will be Lindy Norris.
Hi there. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Lindy Norris, and I'm the Director of Marketing and Public Affairs for New Flyer and part of the team that proudly supports the MTA. During the last board meeting, a series of comments were made suggesting New Flyer's workplaces were unsafe and also alleged instances of discrimination. I wanted to clearly reiterate New Flyer's commitment to protecting the health and safety of its people, namely in the face of a global pandemic that continues to challenge communities across America. I will provide a few details with respect to that protocol now. Since February of this year, New Flyer has worked extensively to develop and implement measures to protect its team from COVID-19. This includes having activated a global response team, launching a new employee website for 24/7 communication access, and developing and launching the NFI Safe Return to Work protocol. This protocol, which is mandatory across all facilities and available publicly at nfigroup.com, includes extensive sanitization, PPE, and distancing measures to ensure hygienic work environments while empowering our team members with resources to keep them as safe as possible. Since the onset of COVID, New Flyer has done everything possible to protect its team and sustain employment while actively advocating for safety across our industry. In addition, New Flyer has several workplace policies in place that it strictly enforces, including its respectful workplace policy and zero tolerance for workplace harassment and discrimination. New Flyer is proud to offer a safe place to work with sustainable employment where every voice is valued at the table, and has invested heavily in supporting and building diversity and inclusion in the workplace. To that extent, earlier this year, New Flyer extended its partnership with the Transportation Diversity Council to launch its community benefits framework with the purpose of this national CBF to expand New Flyer's existing workforce diversity and workforce development model, and to direct and support local initiatives that benefit people and communities. More specifically, the CBF will augment workforce development, recruitment, training, and retention initiatives to strengthen and grow a diverse workforce. It's the national parent initiative applying to all communities where New Flyer does business, and will oversee a series of local, community-oriented initiatives that benefit those living and working where New Flyer operates. The Community Benefits Framework is also publicly available at newflyer.com/CBF. In closing, I will reiterate that New Flyer upholds the strictest workplace health and safety standards, and that it takes the safety and health of its team extremely seriously. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. The next speaker will be Mark Henry.
Good morning, all. Thank you, Chairman Foy, MTA Board. First, I'd like to thank the riders of the public who recognize and support the work the trans workers do, and to recognize that we too need to be protected. Today, I speak on behalf of my membership, Local 1056. When will this board right or wrong? An embarrassment. It's about fairness, accountability to the workforce that stood at the ready, crisis after crisis, and continues to deliver for New York City and its agency. ATU members, just like the ones in TWU, sacrificed their lives and their families' lives for the greater good of this city. Unfortunately, some have paid the ultimate price due to the exposure to coronavirus. This virus is not gone. It's not gone into hiding. It's still out there. Members of this board know this, and so do my members. 1056, we continue to mourn the loss of those brothers and sisters in transit due to COVID-19. These members, your employees, are dealing with ventilation and protection issues on buses and in the facilities. We're being assaulted daily as we speak. We must fight to stay alive with the riding public. They will not wear a mask on public transit. They challenge us and challenge our safety. Where's our protection? Where's our consideration? Where's our accountability? Your accountability to your employees. Our members, your employees should never be underestimated or undervalued. You're hiring consultants. The fees for these consultants have been paid out. The agency budget is skyrocketed, and we can't get a contract. I remind this board we do the exact same work as our brothers and sisters in Local 100 and continue to sacrifice our lives. Our safety is on the front lines because this is hazard is real. It's life or death. We deserve parity wages and hazard pay, and we deserve to be protected at all times. Settle our contracts. Fair days work, fair days pay. No hero to zero for these members that are alive today. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, this concludes the public comment period.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to just confirm the attendance of two more board members. Commissioner Cortez Vasquez, are you present? Commissioner Cortez Vasquez, and if your microphone is on mute, please unmute it.
I am.
Thank you. And Commissioner Mojica. Commissioner Mojica?
Yes, I'm here.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Tom. Let me make a few brief remarks. We've come a long way since March as we mark New York City's entry into Phase 4 of Governor Cuomo's reopening plan this week. More than 2.2 million customers rode with us on subways and buses on Monday. a nearly 60% increase from the last week before phase 1 of reopening in New York City. While improved, current ridership is still down dramatically, especially compared to the more than 7 million daily customers that rode with us at this time last year. Our commuter railroads are carrying more customers, but at a slower rate of growth. Credit goes to our incredible workforce who have tirelessly kept the region moving throughout the pandemic. I especially want to acknowledge the members of the MTA family who succumbed to the virus, and we grieve and mourn those losses, and the many more who suffered from it but thankfully survived. The dedicated women and men of the MTA remain the true heroes of this crisis, and we're all grateful for their service and commitment. I'm glad to report that more than 10,000 employees system-wide have now returned from quarantine since the peak of the virus. This is a major milestone. I also want to thank Mario Peliquin and our agency presidents for their steadfast leadership during this time. Sarah Feinberg, Phil Eng, Kathy Rinaldi, and Danny DiCrescenzo, who you'll be hearing from later. Craig Cipriano and Sally Librera have also done excellent work on subways and buses. As you know, Sally's last day with the MTA is Friday of this week. She's been an invaluable member of the MTA family and a remarkable leader throughout her 16 years at the MTA. As Senior Vice President of Subways, Sally's done tremendous things in bringing the system back and improving performance. And she has deftly steered Subways through what is undoubtedly its most challenging chapter, the ongoing pandemic and the historic overnight shutdown of the system. Sally will be greatly missed, and we wish her well in her future chapters. As we welcome more customers back to the system, it's crucial everyone who rides with us wears a mask. That's why we launched Operation Respect earlier this week. Hundreds of volunteers are handing out masks to help make the system safer for everyone. We're grateful to the state of New York for the generous donation of another 1 million masks, which brings our total amount for direct distribution to customers to 3 million. Huge thanks to Abby Collins, Sarah Meyer and her team for their hard work on this campaign, and Sarah Feinberg and her team. We can't emphasize enough how important it is that all of us wear a mask covering. Public health officials say the single most important thing we can do to protect ourselves and others is to wear a mask. We acknowledge the upcoming 30th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act. The MTA remains committed as ever to improving accessibility system-wide for customers of all ages and abilities, with a goal of future full accessibility. We've come a long way in 30 years and certainly have a long way still to go. Alex Elagudin, New York City Transit Senior Advisor for System-Wide Accessibility, will share an update shortly. A few words about MTA finances and the July financial plan. Last month, when Bob Ferrano presented the emergency financial update to the board, I described the MTA financial situation as a 4-alarm fire. But that frankly doesn't do justice to the severity of the damage the virus has inflicted. We are in the midst of a once-in-a-100-years fiscal tsunami, which has left our infrastructure intact, but demolished fully 40% of our revenues. Before COVID-19 hit, we were making the best progress this organization has seen in decades, with record on-time performance thanks to the Subway Action Plan and the team at New York City Transit, record ridership, and a historic $51.5 billion capital program to modernize our system at every agency. The first page of the executive summary to the July financial plan, which is on the website, states that the pandemic has changed our financial trajectory from growth and investment to one of simply survival. What does that mean? Survival means fighting hard to maintain and not slash current service levels and lose the gains made in on-time performance before COVID-19. Fighting to protect and execute on deliver on the historic capital plan, which promises system modernization across the MTA and would make record investments in greater system accessibility. Fighting to avoid and minimize reductions in force, fighting to bring the agency forward with innovation, and fighting to transform the MTA. In short, survival means the MTA being able to serve the pivotal role it must play in the regional, economic, and social recovery from this terrible virus. Survival will, at a minimum, require the $3.9 billion allocated to the MTA a month ago by the House of Representatives. We're indifferent to the title of the bill that ultimately passed, but we're crystal clear about the pressing need for another $4 billion of federal funding this summer and billions more to cover pandemic-related losses next year and beyond. Our CFO, Bob Ferrano, will provide more detail in a couple of moments, but we're facing staggering historic shortfalls with a projected aggregate $16 billion deficit through 2024. The MTA is losing about $200 million a week in revenues from losses in fares, tolls, subsidies, and also increased COVID-related expenses. To put that in context, we spend approximately $300 million a week to operate the agency. While ridership is increasing from the depths of the pandemic, it remains a fraction of the nearly 9 million people we daily served last year. Farebacks and toll revenue, which typically makes up approximately half of our operating budget, remains far below normal levels due to the sustained precipitous declines in ridership. And bridge and toll revenue, too, remains approximately 20% below last year's levels. Under Governor Cuomo's leadership, New York has bent the curve, but the future arc of the pandemic remains uncertain, and riders may remain uncertain as the virus surges in other parts of our nation. The depressing effect of the virus on every part of the regional economy is having hugely negative impacts on MTA revenues and subsidies. The MTA has faced challenges before, but the pandemic challenge and its effect on our finances is far more severe than any crisis we faced in the past. Worse than the city's fiscal crises of the 1970s and early 1980s, the aftermath of 9/11, Hurricane Sandy, and the Great Recession of 2008-2009. To help balance our books, everything is on the table, including wage freezes, delays and reductions in the capital plan, fare and toll increases, deficit financing, and even cuts to personnel and service as a last resort. We do not wish to implement any of these actions, but the perilous state of our finances may force our hand. This year, the MTA has benefited from staunch support from our local congressional delegation across bipartisan lines, including continued leadership from Speaker Pelosi and Minority Leader Schumer, and members of Congress Jeffries, Espaillat, King, and others. But I especially want to recognize today Chair Nita Lowey for her exceptional and unwavering support of transit at the federal level, in recognition of the critical and fundamental role that public transit plays in powering the local and national economy. As Mrs. Lowey approaches the end of her congressional service, we deeply appreciate her honorable and tireless service, not only to the New York City region, but also her national leadership in Congress, and for her partnership and support on the CARES Act and the HEROES Act, which passed the House approximately a month ago, as Congress continues to deliberate and develop another federal coronavirus relief bill. The U.S. Senate simply must step up for mass transit and allocate another $3.9 billion to the MTA this year to replenish revenues that this year have evaporated as a result of the virus. Funding from the CARES Act, which passed 4 months ago in March, will be fully exhausted this month. It's a simple fact that our organization's very survival depends on the willingness of the Congress, the Senate, to act again and act quickly. And the harsh reality is that even with another $3.9 billion in federal funding this year, and our own efforts to significantly reduce our expenses, which are ongoing, and we will need to do more and will do more, we cannot, and as I've said this all along, cut our way out of this crisis, though we are doing everything we can to reduce costs in areas like overtime and consulting contracts and the like. We've identified more than $1.1 billion in budget savings for this year. About $770 million of that is already reflected in the financial plan, on top of $2.8 billion in annual recurring savings from prior years. But even that is not enough. Bob will take us through those numbers shortly. Our immediate focus is on Washington. Senate lawmakers are currently drafting their proposal for the latest relief package, which reportedly focuses on assistance for schools, small businesses, and testing. Let me be clear, these critical investments all depend on public transportation moving New Yorkers and Americans to and from their jobs and schools and doctor's appointments. I thank Senator Schumer for his record of support for the MTA and his support of our current $3.9 billion ask. Any investment in transit is an investment in the future. An enfeebled MTA would stunt the regional economy and create a depressing drag on job creation. Lawmakers should not recess until public transit is included in the new coronavirus relief package. This is not a red or a blue issue. Last week, the MTA convened a diverse nationwide coalition of 27 transportation agencies from every region of the nation. We're all fighting the same fire, and we all desperately need assistance. With our regional and national economy quite literally at stake, this is no time for political games or delays. Lastly, we'll be reaching out to board members to discuss dates for an August board meeting, the timing of which may be affected by action or inaction in Washington. Before I turn it over to our CFO, Commissioner Law had a comment, I believe.
Hey, Pat, can you hear me?
Yes, Kevin.
Hey, thank you very much. Pat, we all truly thank all the MTA employees, including management and your team. But I also want to thank you. You've been all over this crisis since day one. You certainly get enough blame for a lot of things that go on, and you deserve some credit as well. And thanks for the job that you're doing. So thank you for that. I had just a question related to our COVID response. We're all familiar with signs in stores, especially in the summertime. No shirt, no shoes, no service. Can we or should we insist on a policy of no mask, no service? I'm sure there are enforcement issues, but I think it would help protect our employees and our customers.
So Kevin, great question. Before I turn it over to Phil Eng, let me just make this point, which is by virtue of Governor Cuomo's executive orders, which have the effect and the force and effect of state law. It is state law in New York that no one can ride public transit, subways, buses, Metro-North, Long Island Railroad without wearing a mask. That is state law. Phil, do you want to address Commissioner Law's question?
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Kevin, for asking this. It's a vitally important topic. I am thankful to our riders for strong compliance with the use of face coverings. I know I've seen this personally on my daily trips, which I've intentionally over the course of this pandemic taken from different starting points and different ending points. I've seen high compliance. We've also confirmed that we have high compliance with surveys that we've conducted, but understanding that we need to do more and we can do more, we have constant, strong and constant messaging in our stations, on our trains, and we further encourage mask usage when we had our station ambassadors start providing masks to riders when New York City entered phase 2 in June. And then more recently, we've supplemented this now at 22 ticket windows that we've reopened. We're providing masks at those windows. If customers do not wear their masks, they will not be sold a ticket. But we also have managers now riding our trains to both encourage mask usage and providing them to riders as they encounter them on the trains. And then lastly, I'd like to thank MTA PD as well. If there are specific locations, they've been very supportive. They've increased train rides, helping support, encouraging the use of masks. And I just want to assure everyone that Operation Respect is in full swing here at the railroad.
Thanks, Phil. Sarah?
Pat, can I say something?
Yes, sir.
I second Kevin Law congratulating all of the hardworking employees. Do we have enough signage everywhere? It seems wherever I go, there's always a sign in the window, the door. I think that will help alleviate any problems when we correct someone.
So Commissioner Mack, just before I turn it over to Sarah Feinberg, I'd make the comment that I think it'd be impossible for any of our customers on subways, buses, Metro-North, or Long Island Railroad, not in their daily commute, to have seen multiple signs, whether they're physical signs, signs on video.
Yeah, I would just agree with that. Digital signs, signs in stations. We're doing announcements in the system and stations and also on trains and on buses. Got the digital signs on buses, physical signs on buses, but always open to new ideas and thoughts and suggestions on how else we can deliver the message. So also I can say more in my remarks later.
Thank you, Sarah. I'm now going to turn it over to Bob Ferrano, our CFO, for a report on the July financial plan. Bob.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You will find in Director's desk after this presentation, and also the public will find on our website, the July plan. The July plan has two parts. First, Volume 1, and Volume 1 consists of financial schedules for the complete MTA consolidated financial statements and plan, and also includes an executive summary. And it includes certain adjustments, policy actions that are not built into the budget right now, but the board will need to consider over the coming months. Volume 2 includes detailed budgets and narratives for each of the operating agencies, which then is combined into the Volume 1. So at your convenience afterwards, please review. If you have any questions, just give me a call and we'll answer those. Let me turn now to the slide presentation where we'll go through and hit the highlights. First is a schedule and a slide that you've seen before. At the February plan, which was our budget that was adopted, we projected surpluses in 2020, 2021, and also in 2022. But COVID-19 has and it's expected to further severely impact MPT's finances. Now, we asked McKinsey to help us do an analysis projecting those impacts. And we've developed a model, and from that model, we've now made plans going forward. But as a point of reference, the top line here says our total operating expenses and debt service for the 2 years covered in the McKinsey analysis. We were projecting this year a $17.1 billion operating budget, a $17.4 in 2021, so for the 2-year period, a $34.5 billion budget. The McKinsey analysis that we adopted has fare and toll revenue losses of $5.3 billion this year, $3.9 billion next year, for a total of $9.2 billion. Subsidies are projected to be lower by $1.7 billion this year, $1.9 next year, for a total loss of $3.6 billion. Additional expenses were estimated to be about $750 million in each of the years, for a total of $1.5 billion for the 2-year period. So the total projected COVID loss beginning in March of this year, running through the end of next year, $7.8 billion this year, $6.6 billion next year, for a total of $14.3 billion. That is 45% of our budget this year, 38% next year, and 41% for the combined 2-year period. Now, we did receive the Federal CARES Act monies of $4 billion, which we're very thankful for. So the remaining budget loss for this year is about $3.8 billion, or 22% of our budget. Looking at next year, $6.6 billion, or about 38% of our budget. And for the combined 2-year period, total COVID-19 losses of $10.3 billion, or 30% of our operating budget.
Bob,
Yes.
I'm going to interrupt you just for 1 second because as I told Tom, I have to leave for a client meeting and I'll be back. But what I don't see, having read this, even though we got it 3 minutes before the meeting started, what I don't see is the slightly worse picture on the tax and subsidies. As I emailed this group after the last document, I felt the tax and subsidies analysis by McKinsey was not severe enough. But I can't find in this document where the revised impact of tax and subsidies are. Can you point that out for me, please?
Yeah, if you talk about, turn to slide 3, which is where I was just going. Basically, you have tax and subsidies. So the updated GDP forecast shows a slightly worse picture modeled for Q1 and Q2, which is what you're reflecting on, but similar levels for Q3 and Q4. The early real estate indicators show a sharper drop than predicted, 54% decline in Q2 Manhattan sales, though pent-up demand may lift Q3 numbers and put yearly totals closer to the original forecast. The mobility-related taxes, the petroleum business tax, has been higher than modeled. So what you're seeing and what you're feeling in the economy, I think, is being recognized in an update that we got from McKinsey and then is now reflected on slide 4. So we believe that the impact is still expected to impact our financial plan through 2024. And
So Bob, I'm just going to ask this before I leave, which is on page 2, it says subsidies would be a loss of $1.9 million in 2021. And then the revised page 4 says it's still at 1.928. Is that what I understand is the revision?
Well, you see the subsidy, if you go to the subsidy on 2020, on slide 2, it
Yeah,
was
it's up by
1.7, and we're now projecting for 2020 that it's 2.1.
Got it.
So it is,
Okay, thank you very
as you
much.
said, it is worse than what we initially proposed. So on slide 4, you can see now that we're projecting $4.2 billion fare box loss this year, 3.1 next year, 1.2 in 2022, and then returning back to approximately pre-COVID-19 levels in 2023. Toll revenues are coming back faster, 880 million this year, 730 next year, and 164 loss in 2022. Advertising and rental revenues affected also as the number of customers coming through or advertisers' willingness to use our facilities given the lack of patronage. We have direct COVID-related expenses, 500 million, roughly increasing slightly during this plan period. Net indirect COVID expenses. Now that reflects what the lower electricity, the lower fuel costs that we've had as we kind of pared back our service to just the essential service level. It also reflects lower subsidies that we've received, which help subsidize those expenses. So the net of those two, it's about a 67 additional cost this year, 45 next year. The subsidies we just talked about with Commissioner Zuckerman, it shows the CARES Act funds of $4 billion. So the net impact for this plan period, 3.8 this year, 6.4 billion next year, 3.2 in 2022, 1.4 in 2023, and 1.4 in 2024. Now, those are just the impacts of COVID-19. It doesn't reflect the totality of all of our other expenses and revenues. And that's presented on slide 5, where we lay out what the July plan is in terms of our operating deficits versus what we saw in February. So the small green hashed and red hashed bars are what we were projecting in February. A slight operating cash balance of 81 million, 273 in 2021, 157 million in 2022, and in deficits of 130 in 2023 and 566 million in 2024. Obviously, the impact of COVID-19 has just decimated our finances, and we're now looking at projected deficits during this plan period of $16.2 billion. Now, you see the $5.8 billion deficit that we're facing next year. Let's look at how we might address that if we need to deal with it ourselves. Well, on slide 6, we've laid out really the 3 broad categories of expenses that the MTA has. Labor is our largest category of expense, almost $10.8 billion. Non-labor expenses, which are detailed on the right side of the page, $4.1 billion. Debt service, $3 billion. The $5.8 billion deficit that we are projecting in 2021 cannot be addressed by only non-labor expense reductions. You can again see that even within the non-labor categories, there's clearly essential expenses: fuel, electric power, insurance, claims, paratransit service contracts, materials and supplies. But there are other areas like maintenance and operating contracts and professional service contracts where we have gone through and we are continuing to go through to look to see if there are costs that are not essential that we can cut out. And you can see on the next page, we've started to look at some of those. Now, at the top of this page are actions that are already included in the financial plan. They were in the February plan, and we continue to have them in the July plan. And those are budget reduction program efforts. Those are targets that we've identified for cost reductions, and about $350 million a year. Then there's the transformation savings. because of the COVID-19 and pandemic, we got a slow start on our transformation savings. We're now gearing it back up. We expect that those savings will fully be in place by 2021, and so we continue to show them in our financial plan. We've had a hiring freeze going since 2017, really ramped up in 18 and 19, and that's showing some savings here. But those, again, are already built into our budget. What we need to look at now are additional savings. And that's where the next category, new actions initially identified. We are still vetting these expenses. We hope to add significantly to these expense reductions, but we've addressed right now overtime spending reduction, consulting contract reductions, and then other non-personnel expense reductions. And you can see that we expect to achieve perhaps $235 million this year, $340 million next year, and then approximately $250, $275 million over the following years. Again, let me just say that these are the initial items and categories that we've identified. We're continuing to vet those. We will continue to look for additional significant savings that we can achieve. But really, the key here in 2020, is the $3.9 billion request that we have that was in the HEROES Act, and we hope will be in whatever the Senate passes, and is combined congressional action for this year of 3.9. But these actions that we've identified will not be enough. We're going to have to come up with additional actions. And the actions that we're considering and looking at are at the bottom of the page in the box here. Reduce or delay the capital program, fare and toll increases above the 4% that we've already planned. That's 4% every 2 years. Delay in pension contributions, a wage freeze, a reduction in force, service reduction, and long-term deficit financing. None of these are attractive. None of these are things that we want to do, but we do have to review them. We have to consider them because absent additional federal funds, these are the items that we will have to look to get us out of this financial crisis. On slide 8, I just want to say that we have risen to the challenge of continuing cost reductions in the past. This shows the savings targets that we've had every year and in every financial plan. And every year we've raised the targets. And every year we have hit the targets. And as of 2019 November financial plan, we were almost at $3 billion in terms of total cost reductions. And we expect to be well above $3 billion by the time we finish with this financial plan. And let me point out that these are annually recurring cost savings. So we've taken them permanently out of our operating expenses. So we've proven that we can save money, we can be more efficient, and we're going to continue to rise to that challenge. So slide 9, if we receive the $3.9 billion of additional federal funding, we can balance 2020, but we're still going to have a $5.1 billion deficit in 2021 and out-year deficits. And absent additional federal funding, hard decisions are going to have to be made from the laundry list at the bottom of slide 7, which again, none of them are attractive, they will be painful, but those decisions will need to be made if federal funding does not continue. Let me just say that right now, you're seeing that there is a preliminary budget being proposed for next year that's out of balance by $5 billion. You're not being asked to vote on a budget at this time. You will be presented with the final proposed budget in November, and you will consider it and then vote on it in December. So no action is required on your part today, but we are going to continue to work on this financial plan, and it will be modified and adjusted as we move forward in the calendar year to come up with proposals to address this deficit, absent additional federal funding. With that, Mr. Chairman, I conclude my comment.
Bob, thank you. Can we just go back to slide 7 for a second? I just want to make a couple of points before opening it up to questions and comments. Thanks. I want to start first by thanking the agency presidents and Mario for their works. Sarah Feinberg, Kathy Rinaldi, Phil Eng, Danny DiCrescenzo, Mario, and Pat Warren with respect to headquarters, and headquarters has contributed savings here as well. Point one. Point two, as you can see in 2020, we have already in the financial plan nearly $800 million of expense cuts that are part of the financial plan for 2021. Point three, as Bob said, in 2021, there are, in the second category, new actions initially identified. $340 million of expense cuts beyond those in the financial plan. That's thanks to the work of the agency presidents, Mario, Pat Warren, and the entire team. The point I want to make there is that that cost reduction effort is ongoing and underway, and I would expect that the number, as in the weeks ahead, will grow significantly above 340. The total, therefore, of proposed cuts in 2021, taking into account those already in the financial plan, as well as the ones initially identified, and as Bob says, we're not making decisions today on any spending item or any of the items in the box on 7. But the total cost cuts already in the financial plan plus those proposed aggregate $1.1 billion. And as I mentioned, headquarters has been included and a significant contributor in this effort as well. And with that, I'll open it up to your questions, comments.
Yes, Pat?
Yes.
Vinny?
Pat?
Vinny, yes, please.
My turn, yes, Vinny?
Vinny, please.
Okay. Last week, earlier in the presentation, there is the big pie chart that acknowledges that big chunk of labor. Last week in the briefing, I asked the question. I haven't received any information yet, but I think it's incredibly important that we establish out of that big chunk of labor expense what we deemed as essential during this entire pandemic. I think it's really important that this board and the agency determines the percentage of essential workers, so as we have to make difficult decisions down the road, we ensure that those essential workers are protected, as we know how much we need them into the future. So did we do that yet? Can we get a breakdown?
Vinny, that request is being worked on, and as I said, we'll get it to you and the other board members.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Sure.
Hey, Pat.
Kevin.
Hey, Pat. Hi. Hey, it's Kevin. A couple of questions for Bob. Bob, thanks for, unfortunately, the frightening news, but it was very understandable and quite scary. Do the forecasted declines in fare box revenues of $3.9 billion for 2021, does that include fare increases for next year? And if so, what would the forecast decline in revenues be without the fare increases? And have we or McKinsey examined how fare increases could actually lead to less commuters at a time when we are trying to attract more riders? Thank you.
Yep, let me hold 1 second. Yeah, we were projecting roughly $325 million annualized on the fare and toll increase. But as you recall, the projection was that we would put it in place in March. So the net, I think, was about 275 we were expecting. Right now, it looks like we're projecting about 153 next year if we put the 2%, 4% in place. So the lower patronage, the lower utilization is reflected lower revenues coming in. And so we're not going to see the types of revenues that we expected until we return back to the pre-pandemic level of ridership, which in the analysis that's done for the transit system and the commuter railroads does not happen until we get close to, 2023. So
if ridership was back to normal the fare increases would be worth about $325 million to us.
Yeah, we get about $82 million per 1% on.
That's helpful. That's helpful.
Yes.
And then, Bob, maybe I'll just ask you to perhaps meet with me and Rhonda, the joint Long Island Railroad Metro North Committee, sometime this summer, if we could just discuss these issues in more detail. I would appreciate that.
Okay. Happy to do that.
Thank you, Bob.
Commissioner Khaleesi and then Commissioner Lynn.
And then Commissioner Albert.
Okay.
Yeah, and David Jones.
Thank you.
Got it.
It's apparent that we really do need the HEROES Act. And I'm wondering, has there been any real discussion internally about how MTA plans to make cuts beyond saying everything's on the table? For example, how will the agency choose between cutting expansion projects or state of good repair projects? For me, this, from my perspective, the accessibility commitments are obviously very important as well. And I'd like to see those remain as much as possible. I'm wondering if the board will have we'll see any of those decisions.
Yeah, Commissioner, we are not at a point, as a couple of things. One is, as Bob said, this is not a meeting at which decisions are going to be made. We are not close to that. Obviously, the choices in the box on the bottom of slide 7, all of them are unattractive and unpalatable. But we will come back to the board and have discussion before there's any specific service reductions, et cetera, which is not something that anybody wants to do. We're not at that point yet, and we're not at the point of coming to you and asking you to consider and vote upon any specific cut.
Thank you, Chairman.
Commissioner Lynn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, I also want to join in the comments of praising and saluting the extraordinary work and recognizing the unbelievable hardship that so many MTA employees have experienced. And I'm not, by the comments I'm making, I don't want to denigrate in any way the hard work that everyone has been making. But last month, after Bob Ferrano painted the dire financial picture of the MTA and stated the conditions were so precarious, at that point he said that all options were on the table, I requested to see that the board see details of the preliminary budget and financial plan well before the today's meeting. I said certainly before Monday, 20th. And as it turned out, I think 2 days early would have been great. Instead, thanks to Christina Goldbaum and the Times, we in the city received a little more of an update yesterday, and today there was more in the press. But as Commissioner Zuckerman pointed out, we received the financial plan 3 minutes before the meeting began today. And my concern is that we may have actually been understating the catastrophe that loomed before us. I know, Mr. Chairman, that you've called it a 4-alarm fire, and today you've called it a financial tsunami, and I agree with that. I think it's clearly a 5-alarmer, and my concern is that we don't see the fire engines, nor do we see the plans of how to build them. We're now 55% through fiscal 2020. And what are we going to do in the next several weeks if we don't get the $3.9 billion from the in federal aid? Suppose we get only a piece of it, or even if we get it, what are we doing for next year? We don't see a roadmap for survival. And I appreciate your saying that things are still under consideration. We're going to have an August meeting, but I think we need to discuss the tough options right now. And instead, we see a continuing exit of terrific transit managers, which worries me tremendously. We hear public discussion of org charts and once again hear criticism of the city's homeless outreach efforts, as opposed to a program that builds bridges and finds solutions to our crisis, integrating all of the elements, finance, government at all levels, labor and management working together, and the public. Instead of grappling with the tough decisions, we see the same old battles between the governor and the mayor, the MTA and the city, the legislature and the city, the MTA and the board. I'm not saying any of this is going to be easy. Quite the opposite. I appreciate the efforts that are being made. But I fear that the MTA is truly on fire and no one has found a path out. And I think we had better start an intense, constructive conversation together, the MTA with the board, going over what are those options, what are the things in that box on page 7 that can be done, and how do we integrate that with an overall strategy? And I am really asking that we find a way to work together, not just to see things minutes before we're about to discuss them, but to be able to have an informed conversation. Thank you.
Commissioner Jones?
Yes, I hope I can be heard. Bob, I'm still worried about, I saw a number of 22.5% debt service being projected for, I think, 2023. And a couple of things. Obviously, that's much higher. I'm not surprised. But I'm concerned that does this reflect the recent downgrade we suffered and the potential future downgrades if things don't turn out well? Is that number potentially much too low in terms of what we may be facing in 2023?
No, Commissioner. This does reflect higher interest cost, reflecting the downgrade. So we did adjust for that.
And future downgrades as well? Potential future downgrades as well?
Well, I'm not going to project what or speculate on what the rating agencies may do, but it does reflect higher interest rates. Conservative is conservative. So.
Okay.
Commissioner Albert?
Mr. Chairman?
Commissioner Albert and Commissioner Schwartz.
Yep.
All right, thanks.
Sorry to raise my hand, David.
Yeah.
Thanks, Pat. So, you know, this is really depressing stuff, and we obviously have to avoid those items that were in the box on page 7, because if we all believe that our MTA and all transit systems are the key to economic recovery and people getting back to a normal and working lifestyle, we can't have these items that are in the chart on 7. And if we don't get the federal funding, we really have to start thinking about taking care of ourselves. I have suggested to numerous elected officials that we start talking about a state gasoline tax. Gasoline varies from station to station, from week to week. Many people wouldn't even feel it. But if we had 15 cents hypothetically devoted to the MTA with a portion to upstate roads and bridges, for instance, I think we could start to begin to take care of ourselves and not rely on others for our sanity and our way of life here. And obviously, the delay in the capital program is not good for anybody, and the delay in federal approval of our congestion pricing environmental impact statement should not be tolerated by any of our elected officials. This has all gone on too long. We're relying on people who don't understand the New York lifestyle for our lifestyle, and we have to start taking care of ourselves, I believe. And you know, before we reach having to do the items that are on page 7, we really have to talk about other means of state and or federal assistance so that we can get through this crisis.
Thank you, Andrew. Commissioner Schwartz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm old enough to remember seeing headlines in the New York Post and the New York Daily News back in 1975, where it said Ford to City, drop dead. And I'm really hoping that here in 2020, we're not going to see new headlines in the Daily News and the New York Post where it says federal government to New York State mass transit, drop dead. I'm hoping that with the efforts of our New York delegation that when we money that is needed and necessary to help the New York MTA. There is no way to get out of this problem. The magnitude of the problem is so great that the only way it gets resolved is if the federal government comes in and provides assistance. Just as, you know, the federal government the airline industry has been crushed. The federal government needs to come in here and assist the airline industry. The mass transit industry has been crushed. The federal government needs to come in here and provide assistance. That is the role of the federal government. The New York state government or any state government or the city government doesn't have the capacity and means to do this on its own. That is the role and responsibility of the federal government. There is no way, nobody should kid themselves, as much of the pain that would be there, even with some assistance. The severity and magnitude of this problem, both for the remainder of 2020 and 2021, is so huge. There is no solution. You can do death by 1,000 cuts. But that is not a solution. Raising fares on New Yorkers is not a solution. They're already burdened with high fares, with people being unemployed, people needing to get to work. Service cuts doesn't help our local economy or help the people that need our mass transit system to get to work or get to a doctor's appointment. It doesn't help our disabled community to have service cuts. And furloughing our workers is totally unproductive. It is not a solution. It is a desperate solution. It is a desperate act. And the one entity that can avoid desperate acts is the federal government and the White House. Now, clearly, we're going to continue to work, and today is not the day at this public board meeting to do it. We all need to roll up our sleeves. I chair the Finance Committee, and I plan on rolling up my sleeves, asking not only with Bob and his team, but with the help of Rob Mojica, who's the state's budget director, and his whole team at the Division of Budget. And clearly, we'll call on my colleagues that serve on the Finance Committee and any other board member to roll up our sleeves and go line by line and look at all non-essential services and figuring out how we can squeeze every drop of juice out of the non-essential service orange, right? Looking at all overtime that's not contractually obligated, looking at every line by line on building and supplies, looking at every single consulting contract, whether it's to eliminate the contract or reduce the contract by as much as possible, looking at every single capital project, freezing police classes, cutting salaries in the corporate headquarters, right? Reducing every car, vehicle, every non-essential item. That is a project and process that we're going to need to go through between now and November. But let's be clear. We're not going to solve this thing with gas taxes or other taxes. We're going to solve this if the federal government stands up and does its job and fulfills its responsibility to the state of New York and to the people of America, because we're not the only mass transit system that's in deep financial trouble. There are many mass transit systems that have significant. This isn't something the MTA created. This isn't a problem that the MTA brought on itself. This is an act of God. This is Mother Nature that created this pandemic, that created this economic crisis. And this is the role that the federal government was created to play a leadership role in coming to the rescue of not only our state as a whole, but to the MTA and our state's mass transit system, that our economy, our quality of life, the people of New York, our tourism industry relies so heavily on. Thank you.
Pat?
Yes. Randy.
I agree we need the help from the federal government, and I had floated this tax proposal earlier this month, but I guess I'm not a knowledgeable government person. I had suggested the government sign an executive order, which of course he can't do. but I call on our representatives on the board who have access to the government to see what can be done. I think the session is over, but maybe an emergency session to address that gas tax and other things might be called for. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thanks to the employees who are on the job working.
Any other questions or comments? So let me just make two comments before we move on to a review of overtime. First, Commissioner Lynn, I would just point out, I think we agree about the severity of the situation that the MTA faces, and this is unprecedented and orders of magnitude greater than any past financial crisis the MTA has faced. I just point out that the presentation that Bob made today was substantially similar to the one that was made last Thursday. So there shouldn't be any surprises about the presentation. The numbers have been updated, but the material conclusions are the same. And then secondly, just building on Commissioner Schwartz's point about federal support, obviously we totally agree. We got the 3.9 from CARES. The next step is the Senate, U.S. Senate's consideration of the HEROES bill and the $4 billion for the MTA included in there. As we said, if we get that amount, that takes us through the end of 2020. We still have huge deficits going forward in 2021 and beyond. In making the case to federal officials, I believe it's important that we be able to say, for instance, that on an annual recurring basis, we've taken $3 billion of cost out of the MTA. That's important and has been a huge positive impact on our finances, and the situation we'd be in would be much worse. I think it's also important to point out that in 2021, we have budgeted nearly $800 million of cuts in 2021 that are in the financial plan, an additional $340 million of additional cuts. And as I mentioned, we are reviewing and increasing those amounts. And that diligence and work on our behalf is important, I think, in making the case to federal funders that we're just not waiting for federal funding. And with that, I'll turn it over to Pat Warren for a review of overtime.
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning, Commissioners. You just heard from Bob Ferrano about the significant efforts that are in play across MTA to reduce overtime for the remainder of the year and into the next. Let me take a couple of minutes to update you on the MTA's efforts to manage the overtime budget for the first half of this year and implementation of the Morrison and Forrester report recommendations, as well as IG recommendations. In short, in the first half of 2020, the MTA underspent its budgeted predictions for overtime. This occurred for several reasons. First, the MTA's management of overtime was significantly heightened in the last half of 2019 and the first half of 2020. Second, implementation of the Morrison and Forrester report, as well as the IG recommendations, provided much needed tools to assist managers in this process. And third, the COVID-19 pandemic caused reductions in service, which of course reduced the need for overtime. Could I have the next slide, please? This slide depicts a positive story where MTA, in the aggregate, underspent its reimbursable budget by 4.3%. It is a little surprise that these savings were largely due to limiting some of the planned capital work in the first half of the year. Regarding non-reimbursable overtime, MTA underspent 6.8% of its expected expenses, which is primarily attributable to mild weather and reductions in service due to COVID-19. Here it's important to note that increases in cleaning and disinfecting regimes in our stations and on our rolling stock resulted in increased overtime for employees during this same time period. Again, efforts to improve management of overtime were influenced by tools developed through the implementation of Morrison and Forrester report recommendations. So let me go to the next slide. With regard to the Morrison and Forrester report and the Office of the Inspector General recommendations to improve overtime management, of the 15 recommendations, the Overtime Task Force has worked with agencies to implement 12 of them. 7 of these will require ongoing monitoring within the agencies, and the task force will continue receiving updates from the agencies on these items. And examples of things that we're going to receive updates on are like training, updating policies as we go forward, learn new things, continued implementation of Chronos, et cetera. For the remaining 3 recommendations, 2, the Chairman's annual report and the management of overtime reports are in progress and are expected to be implemented in August. The final Morrison Foerster recommendation relates to the integration of the Chrono system with Payroll. MTA's IT office is working with the agencies to prioritize the various timekeeping initiatives, which will allow full integration, and will also address the more specific IG recommendations. Implementation is planned to continue into 21 and 22 on this particular recommendation. As the Office of Inspector General issued 4, Office of Inspector General issued 4 recommendations regarding overtime, which the IG is also monitoring for full implementation. 2 have been partially addressed with the implementation of the Morrison and Foerster recommendations. One is about reporting, and the other one is about the implementation of Chronos time clocks. And then the additional items are related to the ongoing timekeeping modernization efforts, in particular record keeping and verification of overtime claims. So with that, Chairman, those will conclude my remarks.
Thank you. Any questions for Pat Warren? Let me call on Commissioner Mack, who I think may have a comment or a question related to the financial plan. David. David, you're muted.
How's that?
That's perfect.
Okay. In Jersey, I guess it was 3 or 4 or 5 years ago, they tried to get a gasoline tax. And of course, it was shut down by the legislature because it's very unpopular. But they do have it right now. Last year, they did pass it, and it's very effectual. And we should not take that off the table, without a doubt. It's a way of ensuring a positive tax cash flow. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Let me turn to Jano Lieber.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, this morning I'm going to update you on the status of the capital program. Working with Bob Ferrano, we have maintained the freeze on new commitments for the 20 to 24 capital program. Of the $13 billion in commitments that I projected to you in January and February of this year, the $13 billion we expected to do in 2020, we have at this point, 7 months into the year, actually committed less than $3 billion. But even with new awards on hold, we are busy working on hundreds of active projects that were already underway prior to the freeze. And there's another category of capital work that's moving forward despite the freeze, which is the acceleration program, including projects that could take special advantage of the opportunity to move forward now while ridership is still low. Many of these projects have existing funding or could be jump-started by simply modifying an existing contract. More than 3/4 of the accelerations identified back in May are now underway or will be by the end of this month. We're on track to initiate $400 million worth of work, as I said, in accelerations this month, and there will be at the end of the month only $500 million, less than I think 20% of the accelerations altogether that remain to be authorized this year. We'll continue updating the board on the accelerations in months to come. 2 acceleration projects are on your procurement agenda today. The Rutgers Tube, we heard from several of our public commenters at the outset about that. The Rutgers Tube is the tunnel that carries the A line under the East River. It's the last of the 11 MTA river crossings that was damaged by Superstorm Sandy and which needs to be repaired. The work is in many respects.
No, I'm sorry. It's the F line, not the A line.
I meant to say F. Sorry, thank you, Andrew.
Okay.
The work is in many respects similar to what we've done on the Canarsie L-train tunnel, so we'll be applying the lessons learned on that project to reduce impacts on service. And the connection to the A line is that by getting the Rutgers Tube done quickly in the next 9 months, we'll be assured that it won't interfere with the CBTC work on the 8th Avenue line, which is the A line. The second major acceleration that's on your procurement agenda is a package of 3 ADA stations in the Bronx, the 149th Street Grand Concourse Complex on the 245 and the Tremont Avenue on the BD, the concourse line. This is a small bundle taking advantage of the synergies between those two projects and the advantages of a joint early mobilization. We'll be installing 6 ADA elevators and reconstructing all the stairs throughout those stations. That project, I think, reflects our continuing commitment to ADA accessibility, even as we are stymied for the moment on executing on all of the 70 stations that we had in the 20 to 24 program. Turning to the Cpoc agenda, this meeting of the board includes the Cpoc committee as well. We had on the agenda our major mega projects this month: East Side Access, Long Island Railroad expansion, AKA third track, and the second phase of the 2nd Avenue subway. I'll just give you a very quick précis. Other materials are in the book. The third track project, we had a huge weekend. Again, one of our public commenters referred to it 10 days ago with the replacement of the new Hyde Park Road Bridge, which eliminated the busiest road rail grade crossing in the entire Long Island Railroad network. It's a 4-lane road, and we pushed in a bridge in a single weekend and built an undergrade crossing. We're on track to complete that project 2 months early to return it to service for the community. It was a very big issue for the community that be done timely, and we're actually expecting to be early. So that is fantastic. We've spent only 2% of the contingency on that project. It's on schedule. As I said, credit to the team, both the contractor team, the MTA construction development team, and the Long Island Railroad workers who support us on these major outages. 2nd Avenue subway is running through exercises to reduce cost and complexity, but we are still, like the Central Business District tolling, we've basically been on hold in Washington for over a year. We're waiting for action on our request to move to the next phase of the federal grant process, and we're still in limbo until that happens. East Side Access. In 2018, soon after I joined the MTA, I committed to fixing this long-delayed project. We changed the management approach then, and I doubled down on the completion date of 2022. We've stayed on schedule, though I would say it's hand-to-hand combat, dealing with dozens of separate and frequently conflicting contracts, a legacy from the era pre-design build, when the strategy was to break big projects up into many different contracts. We continue to struggle with the legacy of that era. But we are making progress towards completion, and our principal concern is tracking the systems contract, which covers the 30 separate systems that are being installed with over 11,000 separate devices. And the second major risk that we're struggling with is the introduction, which was only in the last year or so, of the JP Morgan Chase new headquarters building, which has structure foundations that penetrate right through the concourse, because of course this is the Grand Central is underneath Park Avenue, and that has been very disruptive, but we are managing closely with JP Morgan Chase to minimize impacts to schedule and complexity for that project. So as I said, the Cpoc section of your book contains the details on commitments and completions capital program wide, and the independent engineering consultant and I are available to answer any questions related to these projects. Finally, I just want to acknowledge that notwithstanding the acceleration efforts that I've described, the financial uncertainty that is obvious from Bob's presentation necessitates that we do begin, and we have begun scenario planning for what could be significant reductions to the capital program. Obviously, it all hinges on what the chairman has talked about, what happens in Washington, but we've begun that work. No decisions have been made, and obviously that It all hinges on what the ultimate size of the capital program can be and will be. And obviously, this will all come to the board if and when, but that work has begun. Our top priority is to minimize cuts that impact service. We don't want to lose the progress that has been made. We have to prioritize state of good repair investments. But as we say, all options are on the table with respect to the capital program, depending on its size. I would just say in closing that with respect to the potential reduction of the capital program, delay of work, or cuts to everything that we had hoped for in terms of resignaling, in terms of ADA expansions, of accessibility, and so on. We've seen this movie before. Those of us who grew up in New York, I know the chairman did, I did, many of you did on the board. We've seen this movie before, and nobody likes the ending. You remember what the subway was like in the 70s when the investments were not being made and the consequences that took so long to dig out of. We can't go back there. We need the Congress to act decisively, and we need action now.
Thank you, Jano. Any questions for Jano?
About accessibility. I know it's just not an ADA, celebrating the 30th anniversary of the ADA. So thank you for your continued commitment on this. And I look forward to Alex's report in a bit. But I wanted to ask about 59th Street, right? Being accelerated by 11 months. That's quite an ambitious timeline. I love it for a lot of reasons. Saving money, certainly the acceleration. But how is such a big acceleration possible? And are there other opportunities like this at other stations where we can dramatically speed up completion of accessibility projects?
Well, I mean, in that project's case, it was really a matter of outages and manpower. We were, which actually cost money. So we provided a hell of a lot more outages. We analyzed how we could give them more access and more space in the station to complete work contemporaneously. And we were asking them to put more people on it and to work longer hours, which costs money. The good news is when you do work faster, you reduce the overhead costs, which saves money. And in the case of that project, most of the additional cost is being offset by those overhead savings. So that's great news. We did, as we were developing the acceleration agenda, look across the entire capital program to see what projects could benefit from the low ridership and more access and more outages. What ultimately so every ADA project that was underway was looked at, and we very much wanted to do it, and we did it on several projects, I would add. I can go through those with you, but the principal determinant of whether we would add it to the acceleration list was financial constraint, of course, and also whether the work could get underway this summer, because we are all anticipating that the low ridership won't go on forever. So we wanted the projects that could accelerate this summer. That was what was put into the $1.2 billion of acceleration projects that were announced in May. But I'm happy to go over it with you in more detail.
Great, thank you. And any way that I can be involved in helping this, both from my position here on the board and with the city, I'm more than happy to help.
Thanks so much.
Hey, Pat, it's Kevin.
Kevin.
Hey, you said it, Bob Foran said it, Larry said it, and Jano just said it. And Jano, great report, by the way. If we don't get the federal help, we are so screwed, bottom line. And I know we have the best advocate New York could have in Governor Cuomo, and we know Chuck Schumer is doing everything he can. But have we retained the services of anybody who has that direct access to Mitch McConnell, who really holds all the cards here? Because this is life or death for us. And if we haven't, and it's something that you guys are interested in doing, I'd be 100% supportive of it.
So, Kevin, here's what we've done. We've had prominent members of the New York business, real estate, and labor communities reach out to senators in Washington on both sides of the aisle. I don't propose to go through a list of those business, real estate, and union leaders here. That approach was effective with respect to the CARES Act, and we are monitoring very closely events in Washington based on newspaper reports over the last couple of days. It appears to be somewhat chaotic, and we're monitoring it very closely. Thanks. In recognition of the 30th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act, Alex Elegudin is going to take us through an accessibility update. Alex.
Thank you so much, Pat. I'm excited to be here today to present this update. As has been said, this Sunday, July 26th, is the 30th anniversary of the ADA, and the vision of accessibility that was put forth by ADA is something we've been working very hard at Transit to achieve and make progress on. So here is, I'd like to show a video that we've made that talks about our commitment and some of the progress that we've made so far. So please play the video.
Growing up in New York City, every day I spent hours on subways and buses traveling to my high school in a different borough. But I really didn't think about it much. Transit was a part of my everyday life, just like it is for millions of New Yorkers, commuters, and visitors. But when I sustained my disability in college and started using a wheelchair, things changed quite a bit. The city felt very different to me, and getting around was one of my biggest challenges. I never stopped using transit, but I think a lot more about my trips now. Which subway stations near me have elevators? Is it accessible where I'm going? Will I have any issues boarding? Should I just take a bus or Access-a-Ride to be safe? I am one of more than 1 million New Yorkers with a disability. Each of our disabilities is different, but just like all New Yorkers, we need a transit system that works for us. My team and I work every day to improve accessibility in our transit system. As we celebrate the 30th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act, we want to share some progress we've made and projects we have in the works.
We already have more than 300 elevators in our stations. We're here to help all of our customers navigate our system wherever they are on their journey. So we've added real-time elevator status info to our website, the MyMTA app, and station screens. But accessibility is about much more than elevators. That's why we've launched our Accessible Station Lab, and we're now working to figure out how to implement the most successful features in more stations.
Accessibility is one of our core MTA values, and we're committed to investing in a system that works for everyone. We have more than 120 accessible stations across all 5 boroughs, with 25 more projects in progress now. And of course, we're hoping that when the dust settles on the current financial crisis, we'll be able to move forward with the 70 ADA stations included in the 20 to 24 capital program adopted at the beginning of this year. Working closely with community members, we've identified priority stations in each borough for future accessibility upgrades.
We are proud that our bus fleet is 100% wheelchair accessible. Last year, our customers used our bus ramps and lifts 1.5 million times. We're working right now on some new seating configurations with more flip seats and testing low-floor express bus models. And our digital information screens are rolling out across the fleet. We're working with our media team to make sure the design is fully accessible.
Access-a-Ride is our paratransit program for customers with disabilities. Access-a-Ride is the country's largest paratransit service. In 2019, we completed 8 million trips. Our on-time performance is the best it's ever been, but we're always working to modernize and improve our service.
We recently upgraded hundreds of Access-a-Ride vans with newer, cleaner models. And the new My AAR app helps customers book and track their trips more easily. We are also providing better service and saving money by using more taxis and for-hire vehicles and working closely with the New York City Department of Transportation to get our AAR vans moving in bus lanes.
We believe employee training is key to providing good service to all our customers. That's why we conduct ADA sensitivity and disability etiquette training for every employee. Engaging the community is central to everything we do. We set up a new advisory committee for transit accessibility, a diverse group of riders who help us make the best decisions on how to improve accessibility. We've marked Disability Pride Month by opening our bus depot doors to showcase the accessibility features on our past and current bus fleet, and marched enrolled in the Disability Pride Parade with more than 100 MTA employees.
The transit system is a big part of what makes New York, New York. It's our job to make sure that the system serves all New Yorkers. We've come a long way in the last 30 years, but we know we have a lot more to do. We won't stop until we have a system that is not only accessible, but welcoming to everyone.
Thank you. Can you hear me? All right,
Yes,
great. I just want to give some additional remarks. So as we commemorate this anniversary, the MTA staff will take part in a series of virtual panels in the coming days on everything from subway station accessibility to showcasing how our bus design has evolved over time and in our system as well. And we're also sharing lots of accessibility information to highlight throughout the system, including on in our station screens, bus announcements, and social media to really show how we're commemorating this anniversary. Some additional highlights beyond what's in the video on progress that we've made. Also, I'd like to mention Long Island Railroad and Metro North in a bit. But when I started at New York City Transit as the first senior advisor for system-wide accessibility 2 years ago, we already had almost 120 accessible stations, 100% wheelchair accessible bus fleet, the largest paratransit service in the country, and a workforce truly committed to providing accessible service. And we know from our 1 million plus reduced fare MetroCard riders, the frequent use of our elevators and bus ramps and lifts, and the growing number of trips on our Access Ride service, how vital these programs and features are to all our customers, especially those with disabilities, today and certainly into the future. So that being said, we have since accelerated our accessibility efforts across the system. We're adding new elevator stations, accessible stations at a historic pace. This summer, we will finish accessibility projects from our past capital plan at First Avenue and Bedford Avenue on the L line, 86th Street on the R line, Astoria Station on the N and W lines, bringing us upwards of 128 accessible stations and 20 more projects, accessible projects that are in the works, some of which will be done before the end of the year as well. I really want to thank Jano Lieber, Alok Saha, and their teams for their tireless work to keep these projects moving through the COVID crisis and for the acceleration that's going on as well. Looking forward, we have prioritized accessibility in our next capital plan, as has been mentioned, and we're excited about moving ahead with the stations that have already been announced while working to secure funding to make our historic accessibility commitment a reality. As mentioned briefly in the video, accessibility is much more than ramps and elevators. And that's why we do work and launch projects like our J Street Accessible Lab, which is meant to make our stations and travel on our system much more user-friendly by identifying technology and other features to help on that. We're working closely with the Transit Tech Lab to build on features at J Street and pilot other projects. If you use the M23 Select Bus Service in Manhattan, you'll now see a pilot going on with Navalens, QR-style codes on many bus stops, which helps blind and low vision users receive information and identify bus locations. I'm always happy to work with our Department of Buses to keep finding more ways to make bus service more accessible to our riders through improved training, through more flexible seating, as well as the digital information screens, which provide automated announcements and are being rolled out through our fleet. In addition to accessibility on our buses and subways, we continue to work to improve our Access Ride service. Again, as mentioned, moving trips to taxis, new modernized vehicles, more flexibility for our customers, modernized scheduling and dispatching, and many other improvements that we've made over the years and that we will continue to make into the future. We are one MTA family working toward a more accessible system. So I'd like to highlight some accessibility projects at Metro North and Long Island Railroad. 60 of 85 Metro North Railroad stations in New York State are currently accessible, and 107 of 124 Long Island Railroad stations are accessible today as well. Long Island Railroad recently completed projects at North Strand Avenue Station in Brooklyn and Murray Hill Station in Queens, and Metro North will finish work on White Plains Station later this year. The railroads have also been focused on providing accessible information in audio and visual formats and testing new technologies at stations. Metro North is currently installing new PA systems that will be fully integrated with digital screens starting at Grand Central and on the Harlem line. At Grand Central, Metro North recently launched a major project to improve signage with a focus on accessibility, and Long Island Railroad is also incorporating Braille as part of an ongoing signage replacement program. The railroads provide 24/7 assistance to customers with disabilities. Through the Metro North Call Ahead and Long Island Railroad Care programs, customers with disabilities can arrange assistance navigating a station and boarding a train. The railroads also provide on-demand assistance at Grand Central Terminal and Penn Station, and sighted guidance for blind and low vision customers as well on Metro North. Long Island Railroad is also testing a new type of help kiosk that customers with disabilities can use to notify train crews when they need help boarding a train without having to call ahead. Finally, Long Island Railroad recently relaunched its ADA task force, a group of that includes community members and agency colleagues, and meets quarterly to give customers with disabilities direct input into LIA operations and decisions. Additionally, Metro North has established a network of customers with disabilities to solicit input and help publicize issues and projects of interest to the disability community. This is really just all a sampling of the accessibility work going on across the MTA. I am both proud of our progress and focused on the work that remains and the challenges it will bring. Building the infrastructure to be an accessible system is obviously key, but to be welcoming to our customers with disabilities and so they can travel safely, it really takes great customer service, helpful travel information, and many of those other accessibility features I mentioned today. While we go on our long journey toward full accessibility, we want to make sure we do as much as we can today to make our system as user-friendly as possible for our customers with disabilities. On behalf of our executive team and all my colleagues, the MTA stands firm in our commitment to keeping accessibility at the top of the agenda. As we emerge from the COVID-19 crisis and fight for federal funding for a historic capital plan and other funding needs, I look forward to seeing many of these projects continue in months and years to come, continuing to realize the vision of the ADA to ensure our city and transit system is truly accessible to all. And with that, I'll take any questions.
Alex, thank you for the great presentation. Any questions for Alex?
Yes, I have.
Andrew.
Yeah, Alex, thank you so much for all you're doing to make this system really accessible to more New Yorkers than ever. I think it's being really well received and the execution is wonderful. I wanted to point out that on page 76 of the Transit Committee book, where you're referring to some Long Island stations that are becoming accessible, there's a reference to Floral Park, and it says it's in Queens when it's actually in Nassau County. So you might want to make that correction.
No problem. We'll definitely get that corrected. Apologies for that.
Thanks.
Okay.
So this is Victor.
Victor.
Thank you. Alex, can't think of the best person to run this, so thank you for your commitment and working across all parts of the MTA to ensure that accessibility is there. It's really important to have someone like you and an office like yours, and that affirms the commitment to ADA access. But I do have a couple of questions. Number one is I really wanted to talk about the accessible lab at J Street. I'm a big proponent for including technology with bridging the gap for people with disabilities, but we have to be cognizant that there are people with disabilities that don't have access to some of the technology, and that's how come I like why you're adding physical signage and wayfinding on the floor that allows people to get somewhere. So bridging that gap is certainly important, and the idea that accessibility does go is not just about elevator access, although elevator access helps a lot of people. It really is thinking about people with cognitive disabilities, people with visual, and people with hearing disabilities. But I want to know, because I saw the J Street Lab, thought it was excellent. Being that there's so many cuts in operating budgets and operating costs to this, how can we implement this faster? I know there's a lot of tech companies that are interested in implementing this quicker. Is there a way for a public-private partnership that can lessen the cost and B, get it out there quicker? And for time's sake, I'm just going to jump into the second question. And based on the total ridership stats, I'm going to go right into a paratransit question, Alex, because I don't think Craig is going to be talking today. Based on the total ridership stats for March through May, it looks like there was more of a reliance on dedicated service as compared to broker. And big props to dedicated carriers, but I'd like to know why that is, since I've heard a lot about how AR is working to move people away from the dedicated into the broker. And I suspect, and you tell me, that it might be COVID related. I really am a big proponent for increased use of taxis and for-hire vehicles in paratransit. So I would hope that brokers would be capable of taking on more trips if there was, God forbid, a pandemic or similar situation in the future, since we are looking to reduce the size of the dedicated fleet. So thank you.
Yes, thank you for for those questions, Commissioner Khaleesi. So let me start with the first one first. One thing that's interesting about our J Street Accessible Station Lab is we put a lot of different features into one station, and those features fall across different categories, right? They are physical, they are technology, some of them are capital physical, some of them are operating physical. And what our kind of mandate is, as a team and as an agency, is to figure out where does each feature lie in terms of implementation. Some of the features absolutely can be built into future capital programs, right? When we have future ADA stations, these items will be part of the new spec, let's say an ADA station of the future per se, and they will be enrolled in future stations. Looking back at existing stations, things that are technology based, we're working with the Transit Tech Lab, we're working internally, and that is something that lends itself to public-private partnership type opportunities to leverage technology through companies and get these technology features deployed. Now, when you talk about other physical features, some of them may live within our stations department. They're within operating, maybe things like the floor tactile pathways you saw or the tactile maps. Those, we have to find a way to find funding for them, candidly. But the truth is, because a lot of the opportunities can be within our stations department, it's something we can slowly roll out over time. Like signage is something that we rehab in stations, every few years, depending on projects. We need to attach some of these features as we upgrade stations to become a reality. So we're working across many, many different divisions. It's not like okay, all the J Street features, here's a project for that. It's more about dissecting them, placing them properly into divisions, and rolling them out to be successful. But the truth is, the cost of a lot of these J Street features is significantly magnitudes less than putting in an elevator. And that's why we're so committed to them now and in the near term, because they can deliver results in the short term. So I hope that answers your first question. Going to your second question on paratransit, yes, it is true that our dedicated fleet has done a much larger share of our trips of accessorized trips since COVID hit. And so I do believe that a lot of that is COVID related. And I'll give a couple of explanations for that. I mean, once we went into our COVID protocols, no shared rides, very rigorous cleaning, different things like that, we knew that the closest and the most kind of control mechanism that we had was our dedicated fleets. We worked closely with them, and we leaned on them to really be able to put in these kind of protections and additional layers of service to make sure that our customers were traveling safely. Not that we didn't require those from the taxi industry. We certainly work with the TLC, but capacity dropped a lot. We have to work with our brokers to make sure they have proper capacity. If taxi performing other trips, it doesn't work as well. One of the benefits of taxi service is we don't own the vehicles. The taxi drivers, they drive a non-accessorized customer 1 hour. The next hour, they're doing an accessorized trip. That brings a lot of cost and efficiency to us. But at the same time, because it's an independent contractor model, we absolutely have to learn and evolve. We still have to make sure that those taxis are available to us, that they're able to follow all the protocols that are necessary, that we can have strong assurances that those protocols are being followed. And so we don't have a situation in the future where, we might have a reduced dedicated fleet, but we don't have the capacity to come back to. So we have things to learn. We have absolutely things that we have to work on with our brokers and find a way forward to make sure that they can meet the levels of service, the additional levels of service brought on by the emergency as our dedicated fleet can. So thank you for those questions.
Thank you, Alex. Certainly would love to see some more of those vehicles used. And if there's any way that I can assist, please let me know. And I look forward to hearing more paratransit and accessibility updates on the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Alex. I'm going to move now to approval of the minutes. The minutes of the June board meeting and minutes from each committee have been distributed to all members. They're also on our website. Are there any corrections or omissions? Andrew? I move to approve the minutes. Do I have a second? All in favor?
Seconds.
Aye. I'll now turn it over to Paul Fama to introduce proposed amendments to the MTA pension plans in response to the COVID-19 public health emergency. Paul.
Thank you, Pat, and good morning, commissioners. I have one action item for the board's approval. In May, the New York State Legislature passed and the governor signed a COVID-19 accidental death pension benefit. The state law provides that a death from COVID-19 is considered to constitute an accident for pension disability purposes through December 2020. For some of our workforce, those in New York City Transit, bridges and tunnels, and headquarters, no board approval is required because the law directly covers those employees in NYSERS and NYSLRS. For the remaining employees in MTA plans, we request board approval to extend accidental death benefits. State law and collective bargaining obligations require adoption of the benefits for the MAPSTOA plan and the police program. The benefit should be extended to members of the MTA DB plan and articles covering the commuter rails, Long Island Bus, ZERTOA, certain MTA bus programs, and the Long Island Railroad Company pension plan, and to the Long Island Railroad Company plan for additional pensions. Finally, we have collectively bargained with the TWU, the ATUs, and the TSO to provide a COVID accidental death benefit for MTA bus employees represented by those unions in the MTA DB plan. Details of these programs are included in the staff summary. That concludes my comments about this action.
Any questions or comments for Paul? Okay, there being none, before I make a motion, I note that Commissioners Lacewell and Khaleesi are going to recuse on this. I make a motion to approve and adopt the amendments to the MTA pension plan. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? And I note the 2 abstentions. The item carries. I'll now turn it over to General Counsel Tom Quigley to introduce 2 items related to proposed debarment regulations and a revision to the MTA all-agency procurement guidelines. Tom.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, we're going to ask the board to adopt final debarment regulations, and then secondly, ask the board to adopt revisions to the all-agency procurement guidelines. With respect to the debarment regulations, this is the last step in the process to adopt regulations as required by New York Public Authorities Law, Section 1279H, which was enacted in April 2019, providing for the debarment of contractors in certain situations. Last year, we put temporary debarment regulations in place, and we published them for public comments as required by law. We received extensive public comments, and we revised the regulations accordingly. The revised regulations inject flexibility, narrow the scope, and generally are more balanced towards contractors than the original regulations. The changes between the original regulations and the revised ones are laid out in the staff summary that is part of your board materials. This past May, the board approved a motion for staff to go forward with these revised regulations, and we published them for an additional 45 days for public comments, as also required by law. We received no significant public comments, and now we request the board to adopt the revised regulations as the MTA's final debarment regulations and close this chapter on the process required by Public Authorities Law 1279H.
Thank you, Tom. Any questions? On the items, do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Items carry. Thank you.
Secondly, we have an action item asking the board to adopt revised MTA all-agency procurement guidelines. The guidelines were last revised and approved by the board at its June 2019 meeting. The major change to the guidelines at this time is to incorporate the recommendations of the MTA's Cost Containment Committee, which was a joint committee of the board members, including Commissioner Schwartz and Jano Lieber, among others. Among the proposed changes are the inclusion of a neutral dispute resolution, the appointment of project CEOs for each project, the inclusion of a strategy designed to optimize cost savings, and a schedule reduction for each project. A more detailed description of the changes is contained in the staff summary, but we fully believe that that these changes will increase competition among bidders and reduce costs for our projects. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Any questions?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Larry.
I just want to recognize the work that Jano Lieber did on these cost containment reforms, along with former board member Scott Reckler. I really believe that their backgrounds and experience in the construction and development industry were so valuable to being able to come up with these recommendations and reforms that I believe hopefully will create a lot more competition on our capital projects, as well as lower the costs, and for the first time in probably the agency's history, really make sure that the vast majority of our capital projects will get done on budget and on time, and we'll get better pricing. And I just want to recognize and thank Jano and his team because they put a lot of time and work into this. So thank you.
Completely agree. Any other questions?
Yes, I have one.
Andrew.
Do the new procurement guidelines put a penalty on a contractor if they don't live up to the contract, such as fines and or not included in future contracts? Or I'm not sure about that particular piece.
Jano.
Andrew, we're much more aggressive these days about including liquidated damages provisions for failure to comply with schedule, and we're assessing them. So that is our principal tool for, I think, accomplishing what you have in mind. The evaluation process that is used historically by the MTA, I think we actually need to punch up a bit, because we need to have the ability to make sure that everybody understands how a contractor did in fact perform without disqualifying them, because we want to maximize competition, as Larry said.
Thanks.
Great. I'll make a motion on the items. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
All in favor? Aye. Any
Aye.
opposed?
Aye.
Any opposed or abstentions? The item carries. Thank you. Next, we'll move to the Joint Railroad Committee, starting with the Long Island Railroad this month. Before we hear from Phil Eng, I want to recognize and thank Commissioner Rhonda Herman for agreeing to serve as co-chair of the Joint Railroad Committee for Metro North. Rhonda, thank you. Phil, I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Pat, and good afternoon, everyone. With both Long Island and New York City now in Phase 4, I want to assure the public that we're continuing our aggressive efforts to keep customers and our employees safe as we all find a way towards a new normal. Through it all, the Long Island Railroad managers and workforce have continued to adapt and deliver every single day of this ongoing battle to defeat the virus and to help to restore the economy. As riders and workers return for the first time, we're doing all we can to offer them peace of mind and a chance to ease into a new routine. And with that in mind, we continue to distribute masks, hand sanitizers, and disinfect trains and stations. And we know how providing our riders with real-time information allows them to make informed decisions about their travels. When we launched our updated train time app last month, Assembly member Ed Brunstein reached out on behalf of his Korean constituents. And I'm pleased to announce today that our new train time app is now available in Korean. And then we also recently reopened 22 ticket windows and have resumed accepting cash for our customers. The dedication of our workforce has enabled us to execute our service plan with an on-time performance of 97.5 for June. The Long Island Railroad has been vital to Long Island, and we're committed to providing reliable service both today and in the future as we progress critical track and infrastructure work that fortifies our system. And while I'm proud of our workforce for their efforts in the support of two recent mainline expansion project accomplishments, the Glen Cove Road Bridge replacement and the new Hyde Park Road grade crossing elimination, I'm really proud of how my managers strategically plan other work that allows us to take full advantage of these weekend outages and piggyback work on them. This includes raising the track elevation at School Street, continued robust ferry rail testing, maintenance switch work at Nassau 3 interlocking, installation of new conduit for the new Mineola substation, remediating mud spots along the main line, new insulated joints along the new Nassau 1 interlocking, surfacing new crossovers at Nassau 1, and relocating third rail feeder cables at Main Street to support the village of Mineola with a sewer installation. And other important work completed in the past month include the critical state of repair concrete tie installations for Port Washington Branch, as well as a main line from Bethpage to Farmingdale. And lastly, we've also included shifting our improving centralized train operations from Nassau Tower, moving those folks to Jamaica Control Center, and rehabilitated both tracks at grade crossings along Clinton Avenue at Melville Road on the main line. And along with regards to positive train control, that project remains on schedule. With the addition of the Atlantic branch into ERSD, we have 231 route miles, or 76% of our system in full PTC functionality. And shortly, we will add 3 segments, Valley and 2 mainline segments, bringing us to 90% of our track in PTC. And today we're at 94% of our fleet with the latest software. I'm proud of our project team and our workforce as they continue to execute during this pandemic. Further information on all these efforts, as well as other reports, are in the committee book. And knowing that we all want a brighter future for our children and future generations, what better way than by engaging them? We can always count on our youth for their fresh perspective and to speak with unbridled honesty. So last month, our corporate safety team launched a special edition of our annual Safety Along the Tracks art contest. Students in grades 12 through K, or K through 12, I should say, submitted their own face covering mask graphics with creative safety messages about the crucial importance of public health initiative of face coverings. And we received numerous submissions, and we had a tough task of selecting the top 5, but they are Amberlyn Berry Rowley from George Washington Elementary School in West Hempstead, Fatin Asha Ankush from Catherine Phelan School in Woodside, Aaron Gilbert from Weber Middle School in Port Washington, and Lorelei Thrasher from Malvern Senior High School, and Eric Shue from Great Neck South High School. Thank you to all for caring, and congratulations on your creative messages, and as they will be used across our system to help save lives. And thank you to all that participated. Thank you to the public. Thank you to our labor leaders for your support. And most importantly, thank you to our Long Island Railroad workers who have risen to the challenge, continuing to deliver every day as we navigate through this crisis. We're in this together. They're all heroes. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Phil. Any questions for Phil? All right, thank you. Let's hear from Kathy Rinaldi on Metro North, please.
Thank you, Chairman. While our thoughts and prayers remain with the families of the 3 employees who died from COVID-19, I am grateful this month to be able to report for the first time in 4 months that Metro North has not lost another employee to COVID-19. The one maintenance of way employee who was released from the hospital last month and was in a rehab facility has finally returned home to his family, which is wonderful news. I would also like to welcome and congratulate Rhonda Herman as the new chairperson of the Metro North Committee. We look forward to continuing our good working relationship with her in her new capacity. I also want to take a moment to thank and recognize 2 of my executive team members who are retiring this month with more than 56 years of combined service. The first of these is Rich Gantz, who has capably served as Vice President and General Counsel since March of 2016 and is capping more than 26 years of combined service at Metro North on the Long Island Railroad. Rich started in Metro North's legal department back in 1994 as an associate counsel, was promoted to special counsel, served as acting general counsel before departing in 2011 to work as general counsel at Long Island Railroad. And in 2016, we were fortunate to lure him back to Metro North, and he's been serving in this capacity ever since as general counsel. Over the last several years, Rich has led the successful negotiations on acquisition of rolling stock, agreements pertaining to positive train control implementation, and the recent purchase of Grand Central Terminal and the Hudson and Harlem lines from a private holding company. I'd also like to recognize John Kennard, who has served as the Vice President of the Capital Programs Division at Metro North since 2015. This division has had primary responsibility for the design and construction of projects under Metro North's capital program. Under John's direction, employees of the division have contributed to the success of the railroad with safe and timely project implementation through all phases of project delivery, including the completion of the Harmon-Shop multi-phased replacement project and implementation of the Enhanced Station Initiative, with the White Plains Station improvement projects remaining on budget and on schedule for completion at the end of this year. John has been with MTA and the railroad for 30 years and previously served as Senior Director of the Capital Planning and Programming Department, leading a corporate-wide effort to formulate a 20-year needs assessment program and related strategies on rolling stock, stations, shops, and yards for Metro North. We are very fortunate to have Rich and John complete their distinguished careers at Metro North, and I, for one, will greatly, greatly miss their expertise and knowledge. On behalf of the entire Metro North family, I wish them all the best in their future endeavors. This month, we welcome back our returning customers to the city's Phase 3 and Phase 4 reopenings and the Hudson Valley Phase 4 reopening. This follows the month of June, when we increased service to accommodate the slow growth in ridership as the region begins to reopen. During June, we operated above goal at 98.1%, with year-to-date performance 2.8% better than in 2019. West of Hudson service operated above goal at 94%, with year-to-date results 4.3% better than last year, followed by new schedules that went into effect on July 6th for both the Pascack Valley and Port Jervis lines. On July 13th, we resumed service on the Danbury branch in Connecticut after our crews installed more than 14,300 railroad ties and removed approximately 200 old transmission towers, while substitute bus service operated during the month of May. Metro North is now providing 65% of normal service levels with schedules that went into effect on June 22nd and the resumption of Danbury branch service. We're currently carrying approximately 16% of our normal weekday ridership while we continue to monitor service, and we have the flexibility to add more trains to the schedule as appropriate to ensure that our customers have a safe way to get to work and back home. While operating a reduced schedule, we have continued our aggressive infrastructure program since the service impacts are not as significant. Our crews remain hard at work every day, and they are making considerable progress this year in maintaining and improving our system. As the track report on our agenda shows, 26,800 railroad ties have been replaced, 4.7 miles of new rail have been installed, 847 rail joints have been welded, 22 track switches have been replaced, 5 grade crossing pads have been renewed, and 43.5 miles of track has been resurfaced. I can't thank the Metro North workforce enough for all that they have done and continue to do during this pandemic. Our number one priority remains the safety of each employee and customer, and our efforts to protect the health and safety of our dedicated workforce and customers are ongoing. Recently, we reconfigured vending machines at 12 stations throughout the system to allow customers to purchase items of personal protective equipment. Customers can now buy KN95 masks, bottled hand sanitizers, and gloves at these machines. Having PPE easily accessible for our customers at vending machines is a key part for welcoming more riders back throughout the service territory. We are now identifying additional locations to add even more vending machines at stations soon. We are working tirelessly to ensure the safety of our customers and employees by coming up with innovative solutions like this one. And this move is only the latest in a series of measures that we have undertaken to ensure customer and employee safety during the pandemic. Our dedicated and hardworking crews continue with the most aggressive cleaning regimen in the railroad's history by daily disinfecting and cleaning train cars at least once a day and stations at least twice daily. We have also installed touchless hand sanitizer dispensers at stations for customers and employees. Our station ambassadors continue to be at major stations monitoring ridership, assisting customers and making sure that they are social distancing. Free masks and hand sanitizer are also being distributed at stations and on trains for any rider that needs one. In fact, you can catch Metro North's superhero safety mascot, Metro Man, helping employees hand out masks at various locations throughout the month of July. Last week, Metro Man was at Grand Central, and I joined Metro Man yesterday in Yonkers. He was in Stamford earlier this morning and will be at North White Plains on July 29th, from 8 to 9:30 a.m. Meanwhile, we are working with the Long Island Railroad's tech team to bring their app solution for monitoring crowded conditions on trains to our system. We have also turned to the New York's rich pool of talented tech students to see if there are other ways to get even more data and more granular data and bring it to a wider segment of our system. Earlier this month, we launched, along with MTA IT, the State University of New York, the City University of New York, and Microsoft, a virtual hackathon that is harnessing the remarkable creativity and tech skills of students and professionals in our region to improve real-time train seating availability information for our customers, allowing them to more effectively social distance on trains. Winners will be announced this Friday, July 24th, ultimately assisting MTA IT and Microsoft personnel in the months to follow. On the PTC front, as of earlier this month, the section between Bridgeport and New Haven is now operating in full PTC, and we remain on schedule to complete implementation this year. We now have 221 route miles, or 90% of our territory, operating at full PTC, with the complete Harlem line, the complete Hudson line, and the New Haven line from Grand Central Terminal to Greenwich and between Bridgeport and New Haven, as well as the New Canaan and Danbury branches, all operating in full PTC functionality. With fieldwork and testing, the final segment from Greenwich to Bridgeport is anticipated to be completed in the month of August. Amtrak boundaries at New Haven and New Rochelle are expected to be completed by September. Now on to the one procurement in this month's package, which totals $9.4 million. On behalf of Metro North and the Long Island Railroad, I'm requesting approval to award a 2-year competitively solicited negotiated miscellaneous service contract to the firm of Sperry Rail in the not-to-exceed amount of $9.4 million, broken out between the railroads, 3.4% for Metro North, 3.4 million for Metro North, and $6 million for Long Island, for FRA mandated quarterly ultrasonic rail testing and joint bar detection services that are performed along the right-of-way throughout both railroads' operating territories. May I please have a vote for the procurement that is presented in this procurement package?
Thank you, Kathy. Any questions for Kathy?
Yes.
Neil.
I do have a question. Maybe one is for you, Pat. So, and Pat, Kathy, thank you for the great progress on positive train control. If this was normal time, I would be much more inclined to ask more questions about it, but I appreciate all the great dedication in meeting this deadline and getting it done ahead of time. So one question for you, Pat, and one for Kathy. So I heard, Pat, you mentioned, and I'm pleased to honor Rhonda Herman as the co-chair of the Joint Railroad Committee. I then separately heard that Kathy said she is the chair of the Metro North Committee. I do not understand from a governance perspective what has now happened to our 2 or maybe 1 railroad committees. Can you just please clarify that? And then I have a question for Kathy.
Well, in pandemic times, Neil, given the fact that we're doing all business in one day, the committees have been operating jointly, and I think that's been going smoothly.
I think also to chime in on that, Neil, statutorily, there are required to be 2 separate committees. There's a Long Island Railroad Committee and a Metro North Committee. That statute has not changed. But for some time now, the committees have been meeting jointly. So, we now to Pat's point, it's been combined with the meeting of the full board. Ultimately, if we go back to regular committee meetings, my expectation is that the committees will continue to meet jointly, but there are technically 2 separate committees.
Okay, that's what I just want to understand. Thank you.
Yeah.
And then separately, Kathy, for you, you mentioned we're at 65% of our service and 15, I think you said 15% of ridership. My question for you is there an opportunity, while the cost implications would not be great, to further reduce service so it's slightly more in line with the ridership, knowing that, of course, the ridership is spread across the day in different times, and there's no way the 2 of them would be aligned perfectly. But is there any opportunity to reduce some of that service so we can drive some cost out in the near term?
Well, we're certainly looking at ridership levels, Neil. I mean, I think that there's a couple things out there. The one thing that I would note is that Long Island is actually operating more service than we are. So we are, a bit behind Long Island with respect to the service that we're currently providing. The other thing that we're keeping a close eye on, and obviously this is, going to be affected by, COVID levels across the country. We're currently anticipating that, we may see an increase in ridership right around Labor Day. And we're preparing for that and looking ahead to that. So, again, there's a lot of uncertainty with respect to how people will be working, even if they come back, how many days a week they'll be working. Obviously, that's something that the entire transit industry is keeping an eye on. So to answer your question, I think we're still significantly below budget, given that we're providing less service than we had anticipated before pandemic. So I don't really know that there'll be opportunities to reduce service, and we are looking towards, potentially having not a significant increase, but something of an uptick in ridership around Labor Day.
Neil, I would add, I think it's an excellent question. Last time I checked, commuter rails in the region, including those outside the MTA, ridership has been lagging. Kathy's right. I think there's an expectation that ridership will increase post-Labor Day on the commuter rails. We'll see, and obviously, given the state of our finances, that's an issue that we're going to have to look at carefully at every opportunity. If there are no other questions, I will make a motion to approve the procurement. Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed or abstentions? The procurement carries. Thank you, Kathy. Sarah?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning to the board, good afternoon to the board. I just will make a couple of comments because I know the meeting is going on, and I think most of the comments that I was going to make have been made by others already, so I'll just be brief. First, I just wanted to make a couple comments about Sally Librera. Others have mentioned it as well. Sally's last day with New York City Transit is this coming Friday. She's been a leader at New York City Transit for more than 16 years now. Certainly, I got to know her when I was chairing the Transit Committee and developed great respect for her. And then becoming interim president of New York City Transit, I think Sally and I were either emailing, texting, speaking on the phone, or meeting in person, 18 hours a day, 19 hours a day for much of March, April, and May. So I've become incredibly close to her in the last few months. She's a passionate leader, dedicated public servant. She showed incredible leadership, I think, bringing subways really back from the brink over the last couple of years, and then especially over the last 4 months, dealing with COVID. I don't want to describe it as a challenge because it just is misleading. It was just such a massive crisis for New York City Transit, and she really rose to the occasion and displayed great leadership and compassion and empathy. And we will miss her greatly, but we're happy for her that she will get to go spend couple of weeks or months with her family, who she's not seen much of the last several months and last couple of years, and then we'll go on to do other things, and we will watch her with a lot of pride and admiration from here. So we will miss her and have tremendous respect for her. Frank Gizeski has agreed to step in the interim role. He is, as all of you know, extremely able, extremely experienced, a very calm, cool leader. He's had to step into this role before, and so we know that we are in a great place, and I'm grateful to him for his service. I also just want to thank Sarah Meyer and her team for some of the efforts that many of you probably saw on our buses and in our subway system this week. Operation Respect, also known as the Mask Force, was out this week. I was out in the system for a couple of hours on Monday. I know many of you were out on Monday. Many of you are planning to go out on Thursday. It was incredibly gratifying just to be, we're all in the system every day anyway, but to be out in the system handing out masks, it was a great experience, and I would urge board members, if you have a few hours, if you're going to be in the city, please consider letting us know and participating. A couple of reactions. First, we had hundreds of volunteers who participated, which felt great, both MTA employees, but also advocates, volunteers, elected officials, and others. I want to, we have checkers out in the system on a daily basis, checking for mask compliance on buses and subways. We see those numbers, we report them out. They've been somewhere between 91 and 95%, I think, both on subways and buses for some time. But, I'm obviously always paying attention when I'm in the system. I know others are too. My anecdotal feedback is I feel like most people are wearing masks. But to be in the system for a couple of hours at a time on Monday, I think I feel like in my own count, mask compliance must have been at like 97 or 98%. I mean, it was hard to find. If you were only handing out masks to people who didn't have them, you would have been there all day and never have handed out all of your masks. So we were also handing out masks to folks who just needed an extra one. You could tell they've been wearing their surgical mask all day or for multiple days, and people were incredibly grateful. I did not get any rude comments. I think a couple of our folks got, some one-offs here and there, which is inevitable, but people were really grateful. They assumed we were selling them, and sweet people were pulling out their wallets, and we were saying, no, we're just giving them away. And the one thing that was striking was healthcare workers in particular, or at least people in scrubs, so I assume that they're healthcare workers, were very grateful and just thanked us for being out in the system. So Sarah Meyer and her team get all credit for this. It was their idea. They pulled it off beautifully. Everything from coming up with the idea to managing volunteers and sign-in sheets and teams. So huge credit to them. And then on the bus side, to Craig and his team, just huge congratulations for rolling out the app yesterday. For those of you who are not familiar, this is a little bit similar to the app that Phil rolled out a couple of weeks ago, where you can get a better sense of capacity of the approaching train. For this app, it basically it shows you the capacity of the bus. That is, so if you're waiting at a bus stop, you can see, the next bus that's approaching, the bus behind that, how, what level of capacity is the bus at. So this is obviously extremely useful for folks who are looking for a less crowded bus, who are worried about social distancing, who, want to, who have a little bit of time and can be choosy about which bus they're going to take. So that was, again, great. All credit to Craig's team, but also to Sarah Meyer's team, who have been working on that for some time, and it's very exciting to finally have it out. It's on 40% of buses now, and will be on more over the coming weeks and months. And I just, as always, a huge thank you to our workforce, who just continues to show up day in and day out and be leaders in this community. So thank you. That's all. I'll be happy to take questions.
Yes, I have one, Mr. Chairman.
Andrew.
Yeah, Sarah, thanks so much for that report. I'm going to say something about Sally Librera in a second, but can you tell me how many signs are on the outside of subway stations advising riders to wear masks? I know they have some service information, but have we put the masks required on the outside of stations yet?
First of all, I forgot to do my procurement, so I will be coming back to that. Sorry about that. Second, Andrew, we'll get back to you. I don't know what the number is on outside of stations. There are thousands of signs within stations.
I see.
So, but we'll get back to you. I'm just not sure how many are on the outside, but we can probably do a quick estimate.
Thank you. I just wanted to say a personal thank you to Sally Librera, who has put up with my emails for years. Every time I see an incorrect sign or hear an incorrect announcement, particularly during GOs, I have to say the accuracy has really gone up since Sally and I have been communicating regularly. There are very odd and sometimes confusing service guidelines during GOs. And right now, I think the conductors are doing a fabulous job on explaining it all, giving you alternate routes, making sure signs in the trains are accurate. And I give all the credit to, obviously, to all of the people working with Sally on this very complicated system and very complicated signage and service pattern. And so I wish you all the best, Sally, and thanks for everything.
Thank you, Andrew. Sarah.
Okay, the New York City Transit procurement package includes 2 items for an estimated amount of $261 million. The contract award to Motive Power, Inc. in the amount of $233 million is for the purchase of 25 diesel battery hybrid locomotives and related non-car items. These 25 new locomotives will directly replace a portion of the existing aging fleet and are required to transport flat cars and various work cars throughout the transit system to provide support for track maintenance work. The diesel battery hybrid propulsion will optimize battery usage and will operate in battery mode in the tunnels, thus minimizing diesel emissions. The contract includes an option for the purchase of an additional 45 diesel battery hybrid locomotives, which, if exercised, would be the subject of a future board approval. The second is a contract award to CAD Railway Industries in the amount of $27,957,413 for the conversion and upgrade of New York City Transit's existing 10 R77E single cab locomotives from third rail power to diesel-powered propulsion. This will, as an interim measure, increase the number of locomotives readily available for critical work within the New York City Transit subway system in advance of the delivery of the aforementioned diesel battery hybrid locomotives. Pricing for both procurement actions is fair and reasonable. I submit these procurements for board approval.
Thank you, Sarah. Any questions for Sarah? I'll make the motion to approve these procurements. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. All in favor? Aye. Any
Aye.
opposed or abstentions? The procurements carry. Next, Jano Lieber will present the C&D procurements. Jano.
I'm going to go very quickly. Construction Development's procurement package this month includes requests for approval of procurements totaling $237 million. There are no non-competitive procurements this month. The first set of competitive procurements requests approval to enter into 8 indefinite quantity contracts with 4 contractors to perform asbestos abatement and other environmental remediation services at all MTA facilities. Each contractor will receive 1 federally funded and 1 state-funded contract within a total estimated aggregate budget of $50 million over a 4-year duration. These are all $0 contracts with no minimum guarantee of any assignments. Work orders under these contracts will be assigned on the basis of price, contractor staff availability at the time of assignment, and performance on current and prior work orders. Excuse me. The other competitive items are the 2 accelerated projects I spoke about in my remarks earlier. The first is for the design and construction of the Rutgers Tube rehabilitation project in the amount of $90.5 million with a 13-month term. And the second is for the design and construction of accessibility upgrades at the Bronx's 149th Street Grand Concourse Complex and the Tremont Avenue Station in the total amount of $93,209,726 with a duration of 35 months. C&D also have 1 ratification this month. This was the project that was the subject of a question earlier. It's for the retroactive modification of a contract for the installation of elevators at the 59th Street Station in Brooklyn in the amount of $3.5 million, an existing project targeted for acceleration. This modification will accelerate the in-service date by 11 months, delivering an ADA accessible path by October of 2020. The modification also provides for incentive payments, which will not be made if the October date is not achieved, and we are submitting these items for your approval.
Thank you, Jano. Any questions for Jano? I'll make a motion to approve these procurements. Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed or abstentions? These procurements carry. Next, a report from Danny DiCrescenzo, Bridges and Tunnels. Danny.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good afternoon, Commissioners. Hope everybody is well. I will also keep my comments brief. I will start off by commending Bridge and Tunnel employees for their actions earlier this month to address the weather challenges with Tropical Storm Faye. With thorough preparation, Bridge and Tunnel personnel kept our customers and themselves safe throughout the storm's high winds and heavy downpours. So great job by all involved. As the chairman mentioned in his opening remarks, Bridges and Tunnels traffic levels continue to be below 2019 levels, but we are seeing a steady rise in traffic from its lows in April. In this month's board materials, we report that Bridges and Tunnels paid vehicle traffic was 49% lower than in May compared to the same period last year. For June, compared to June 2019 traffic levels, we saw a 31% decline. And as we close out July, Bridge and Tunnel traffic is still tracking below 2019 levels, but the gap is steadily closing month to month, and we will continue to watch it closely. Finally, as some of our employees return to the office this month, and as our frontline employees continue to keep our bridges and tunnels safe and secure, I wanted to note that together we are committed to keeping ourselves, our families, our fellow employees, and the traveling public as safe as possible. I thank the entire Bridge and Tunnel team for their great work they do each and every day through these challenging times. With that, Bridge and Tunnels has 2 contract modifications this month that are both associated with the Moving New York Forward initiative. The first is for design build services to design, furnish, and install additional fire standpipe sections at the Robert F. Kennedy Bridge in a negotiated amount of $4.6 million. The second is an amendment for additional structural steel repairs at the Verrazano-Narrows Bridge in a negotiated amount of $10.7 million. I submit these procurements for approval.
Danny, any questions from any of my colleagues? I'll make a motion to approve these procurements. Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed or abstentions? These procurements carry. Thank you, Danny. We'll turn next to the Finance Committee, and David Keller will present an action item.
Good afternoon. There is one Finance Committee action item to authorize the annual payment of the state assessment on the MTA and its constituent agencies for the Public Works Enforcement Fund, PWEF, for calendar year 2020. State law requires state agencies and authorities to pay an assessment based on 1/10 of 1% of the value of public work construction contracts entered into, excluding rolling stock contracts. The assessments are used to cover Department of Labor expenses related to its enforcement of the state's prevailing wage law. The state and the MTA have a procedural agreement with payments made each year based on an estimated amount of public work contracts, with adjustments made for prior year differences between that year's projection and the actual. This 2020 payment, therefore, is based on the 2020 estimate and an adjustment for 2019. The 2020 estimated assessment is $1,706,141 and is reduced by the 2019 adjustment of $236,479 due to lower actual contract value in 2019. The result is a required PWEF payment of $1,469,662. I submit this item for board approval.
Thank you. Thank you, David. Does anybody have a question for David? I'll now make a motion to approve this item. Do I have a second? Ada? Thank you. Thank you. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed or abstentions? The item carries. Thank you. Next, we'll hear from MTA Chief Procurement Officer Kavesh Ayer. Kavesh.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. MTA headquarters has 3 competitive procurement actions totaling $73,180,187. The first action proposed is an award totaling $18,180,187 to Corvelt Healthcare Corporation to provide various services to support the MTA's Workers' Compensation Federal Employers Liability Act no-fault general and auto liability programs for 5 years. The next action is an award to IBM to provide comprehensive vulnerability and patch management services. This action totals $40 million for the 3-year duration, with an additional 1-year option. The final action is an award to 13 firms to provide cybersecurity subject matter expertise on an as-needed basis, with an aggregate budget of $15 million for 5 years. There are no non-competitive actions, no ratifications proposed this month. I submit these procurement items for approval, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Kavesh. Any questions for Kavesh on any of these 3 items?
I have one question.
Yes, Neil, sorry.
I'm glad to see this has been a topic I have raised a number of times privately and publicly, and I'm glad to see we're putting financial wherewithal behind this topic. In normal times, I would consider this one of our greatest risk categories. Obviously, that's been superseded by our financial risk and our health risk, but this is a very important topic and one we can't not attend to. However, I do want to understand, you have 13, I think it was 13, I don't have it in front of me, number of vendors you've listed in the second grouping. It is unclear, at least, and maybe it's intentional for security purposes, of how you are thinking about each of these various vendors and what their select skill sets are. Is that because each one is a general contractor and you want the ability to work with them in different things, or does each one have a specific skill set?
So these 13 firms have specific skill sets, and it's the reason why we wanted to place them on a panel with particular subject matter expertise across the cyber security paradigm. And as a result of that, we will then approach selective panel members based on the requirements of the MTA in relation to our cybersecurity needs.
I'll just channel past procurement advisors in this organization, which is, yes, many create many voices do create a form of competition, but also having 13 different vendors you may go to simultaneously gives up a potential price opportunity that you may have down the line with that, instead of giving it to one or two maybe. So I'll leave you to be the expert to determine how all 13 are using their skills. But that's a lot to manage across many, many, many vendors.
Thank you for that, Commissioner. A final note on that. What we're doing is we work very closely with IT and the cybersecurity chief. And what we look at is which particular vendor has that subject matter expertise, and then reach out to them. So yes, but we take note of your comments, and we'll work very closely with IT in respect of that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments for Kavesh?
Pat, it's Linda, just briefly.
Yes, Linda.
Just to clarify, is this a panel so that you have them available to go to as needed? You're not managing 13 at one time?
Correct. It's on an as-needed basis.
Thank you.
Good. Any other questions or comments? Then what I'm going to request is a single motion for the three items, and then we will vote on them separately because Commissioner Lacewell is going to recuse on the first one. So do I have a motion for the three items?
So moved.
All right, I will second them. I'm going to take a vote first on Corvell Healthcare Corporation. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And please note Commissioner Lacewell recused. With respect to the second item, IBM Comprehensive Vulnerability and Patch Management Services, $40 million for 3-year duration with options. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed or abstentions? Thank you. And then thirdly, the final item with respect to an award to 13 firms on an as-needed basis, aggregate budget of $15 million for 5 years. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed or abstentions? Thank you. Those three items pass. David Florio, please take us through the real estate items, if you would.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Real estate has 8 action items for consideration and approval. There are 4 MTA-wide action items. 3 of these actions are modifications to board policies governing the licensing of real estate space, retail space, and all of the MTA agency's properties. These are intended to give MTA real estate greater flexibility in addressing the challenges to our retail space in light of COVID-19's impacts. The 4th MTA-wide item is an eminent domain resolution in support of Phase 2 of the Second Avenue subway. There is one action item for New York City Transit, is the acquisition of easements from the Parks Department at a Canal Street property to construct an underground substation in support of CBTC that will provide service enhancements on the 8th Avenue line. The Long Island Railroad has 3 action items. The first is the acquisition of permanent and temporary easements from Varia Borden LLC and the Glen Garden Corporation to facilitate flood mitigation and prevention at the Long Island City Yard. The second item is the lease amendment with Vornado Realty for Long Island Railroad's backup house space in 1 Penn Plaza. And the last is a letter agreement and amendment to the master agreement with Vornado to facilitate concourse improvements to level A at Penn Station. There are, in addition, 3 information items, Mr. Chairman. We're happy to answer any questions regarding any of the foregoing.
Commissioner Lynn, you have a comment or question?
Yes, I do on the CBTC 8th Avenue project. I am fully supportive of the project going forward. I think it's important. It's a critical project to modernize the transit system. I think that there is a dispute. I understand there's a dispute as to the appropriate payment to the city where the MTA has made its proposal and the city has a right to get an appraisal, but I think that has not yet been completed. As I understand, the city would like to resolve this, and I would like to offer myself as a possible facilitator of those discussions, if that is helpful. In any event, at this point, since there isn't a resolution, I'm going to abstain on this particular item.
I can, in answer, it's Janet Lieber, Commissioner. In answer to your question, I think we are fully cognizant of the legislature provided for this process where the city gets its own appraisal, and we're ready to work with the city to resolve this. It is below grade space, which the So the city's own zoning resolution assigns no development value to, but we were stuck for, I think, 2 years with the city's Parks Department taking the position that it should be valued as if it were a development site in Tribeca. So considering that this is adjunct to the CBTC and improvement of the 8th Avenue line, we got into this situation, and now we have a path to resolution through the appraisal process, and we're ready to do it.
So I'd like to say I think that the city would like to resolve it, and I again offer to be helpful and facilitate if that's useful.
Thank you, sir.
And this is Victor Calisi.
Commissioner.
So on the 2nd Avenue subway, how many residents and businesses will be displaced as a result of this action? And the second question, if we move forward on this and displace people, we need to make sure that we actually follow through, and not sure whether we can ensure that that will be the case if there are cuts to the capital program, including as it relates to the 2nd Avenue subway. So I just want to put that out there, and I appreciate it. Thank you.
So this is an eminent resolution that enables us to proceed with eminent domain. It doesn't require us to do it. And I just would assure you that all of the processes about relocation of individuals who are in properties that are subject to eminent domain will be followed carefully, as they were on the 2nd Avenue subway. There were no legal disputes that came out of the 2nd Avenue subway in this respect, and we're shooting for the same outcome if and when the extension takes place. Thanks.
Yeah, I just don't want to see people prematurely displaced. That's all. Thank you.
Can I get clarification that the city will do an assessment on the Parks Department property? Can I get that clarification?
That is the process the legislature set out, and they will be given that opportunity.
And as
I think it's an appraisal, and the question is whether that is the next step or discussions to try and resolve it. But I think discussion should start immediately.
We're ready. We've been at it for a couple of years now. Thanks.
Right.
Any other questions on these items? Then I think we should have 2 votes, but I will make a motion on all the real estate items. Do I have a second? Then let's vote on all of the items except for the New York City Transit Parks Department 8th Avenue CBTC line, which we'll vote on separately. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Aye. Any opposed or abstentions? Okay. With respect to the New York City Transit Parks Department 8th Avenue CBTC item, all in favor? Aye. Opposed?
Aye.
And
Aye.
Commissioner Lynn, you're going to.
I'm going to abstain.
Okay, very good.
I will also abstain.
Yeah.
Okay, Commissioner.
Victor Calisi.
And this is David Jones. I also abstain.
I'm sorry, Commissioner, I just didn't hear the comment.
Victor Calisi will abstain.
I understood.
David Jones will abstain.
Did you get the comment? I abstained.
Commissioner, got it.
Thank you.
We have votes.
Abstention for Jones.
Commissioner Jones, duly noted. We're good, yes? Okay. The
Corvell Health, I'll recuse myself.
Okay, duly noted. All right, so 4 abstentions duly noted. The CBTC 8th Avenue item passes as well. Thank you. Pat Warren, Safety Committee, if you would.
Thank you, Chairman. First and foremost, MTA safety statistics remain consistently good, reflecting the emphasis leadership across MTA place on the matter. Statistics are found in the board book. We have previously reported on the effects of COVID-19 on the workforce and the safety activities that were put in place to reduce these risks. These safety activities have led to extremely low levels of new positive cases and improved availability of our employees to support operations, so that's all good news. We continue to look for all new avenues of programs that are out there to support the continued challenges of the COVID virus. This month, we also provided you an update on the MTA's implementation of National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB, recommendations and their investigations. Regarding their ongoing investigations, the NTSB completed all 4 of their ongoing investigations. From these completed investigations, the NTSB issued 5 new recommendations to the MTA, of which 1 has already been closed. Regarding the outstanding recommendations, the MTA saw significant progress in the NTSB's evaluation of our efforts, where they closed 18 of the 27 recommendations, with 9 remaining open. Of the open recommendations, NTSB classified 5 as open acceptable, and 4 are new, recently issued, and they have no status yet. Details regarding each recommendation are also found in board materials. I want to add a comment that on slide 10, it should, for the Nye accident, it should say that it's attributable to Metro North Railroad, not New York City Transit. Chairman, that concludes my remarks.
Thanks. Any question for our Chief Safety Officer? Okay, thank you. I'm going to ask Michelle Woods to address Audit Committee items. Michelle.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We had 13 items on the work plan and 1 item has been postponed. The IT report on the security of sensitive data will be made at the October Audit Committee. The single audit report, the investment compliance report, the 2019 review of the MTA IG's office expenses, and the MTA consolidated management letter. The reports on these items have been provided to the Audit Committee and are included in the Audit Committee materials. Jill Strohmeyer from Deloitte and Noemi Lopez, the acting MTA Comptroller, are available to answer any questions.
Terrific. Any questions for the representatives of Deloitte or the acting MTA Comptroller?
Pat?
Commissioner.
Yeah, I have a little problem. I have to abstain on Vornado's 2 requisitions only because I know them personally.
David, duly noted.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments for Deloitte or the acting MTA Comptroller? Do I have a motion from a member of the Audit Committee to accept these 6 items?
I so move.
Commissioner, thank you. Do I have a second?
Yes, you do. David Jones.
Thank you. This vote is for members of the Audit Committee only. All in favor on the Audit Committee?
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Audit Committee. There are 4 information items which relate to the operation of the MTA's compliance program. The items include the Enterprise Risk Management Update, the Ethics and Compliance Status Report, the Financial Interest Report, and the Report on Open Audit Recommendations. Lamont Kearse, the MTA's Chief Ethics, Risk, and Compliance Officer, is available to answer any questions on these reports.
Any questions for Lamont Kearse?
Next, the Department of Diversity and Civil Rights has prepared an update on the status of the performance measures and compliance monitoring used by DDCR in tracking the critical tasks. Michael Gardner is available to answer any questions.
Any questions for Michael Gardner on that report?
The final item is the MTA Audit Services Mid-Year Status Report. Through the first 6 months of this year, we've completed 34 operational and assurance audits and issued 51 findings with recommendations to improve transparency, governance, and internal controls. These audits identified potential cost savings and efficiency opportunities of $6.1 million at the agencies. We also performed 176 audits related to the capital projects. Third-party question costs for these audits were $37.5 million year to date. We have worked with the agencies to focus on new areas of risk during the COVID emergency, including emergency contracts and cleaning initiatives. I will be working with the agency presidents to prioritize the remaining operational audits in the 2020 audit plan. Finally, our onboard program at the railroads was on pause from mid-March through June. We resumed this project in July 1st. This concludes the Audit Committee work plan.
Thank you, Michelle. Any questions for Michelle Woods? Thank you. Now to corporate governance. Lamont Kearse will introduce the Corporate Governance Committee items for this month. Lamont, please.
Yes, thank you. Other than the revised procurement guidelines, which were approved earlier today, I have 2 items for the board's review and approval. First is the MTA's 2019 mission statement and performance measurement report, which is required pursuant to Public Authorities Law Section 1269F and 2824A. The second item I have is Public Authorities Law 2824 requires the board to approve certain policies. We have provided an exhibit book which contains 3 policies for the board's review and approval.
Thank you, Lamont, for that work. Any questions for Lamont? I'll make the motion to approve these items. Can I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? The items carry. I'll now make a motion to adjourn the meeting. Before I do that, I'll note that we will be having an August meeting. We'll come back with the date on that may be affected by action or inaction in Washington, and we will do our very best to pick a date that works for the maximum number of board members. I'll make a motion to adjourn the meeting. Do I have a second? Second. All in favor? Aye. The meeting is adjourned. Thank you all. Obviously, we just had a vigorous discussion of the July financial plan and the fiscal tsunami that the MTA faces. This is an important month. We believe the Senate, U.S. Senate, is back in session, and it is critical that we received a $3.9 billion amount, which was included in the HEROES Act. As I said, we're indifferent as to what the ultimate bill is called, ultimate law is called. But that level of funding is really essential to get the MTA through the rest of 2020. That will cover our revenue declines and increased expenses for the remainder of 2020. And obviously, we have needs in the billions of dollars beginning January 1st, 2021. And with that, Alfonso.
Alfonso, if you can hear us, we need you to unmute.
Hear me now?
Go.
Okay. Hi, Pat. Thanks for doing this. A couple things. You've said on several occasions there will not be a pandemic-related fare increase. I've sensed a little bit of a softening of that stance in recent weeks. And then today, Bob Foran outright said that the MTA has to consider a fare increase beyond the planned 4%. So can you clarify whether or not a fare increase beyond the planned 4% is on the table?
Yeah, Alfonso, what we've said is that everything is on the table. Everything has to be on the table. The things that are listed on slide 7 in the box at the bottom, every one of them is not optimal, unacceptable, and unpalatable. But given the fiscal tsunami that we faced, we've got an obligation to consider all of those things. And every one of those is not something that anybody here at the MTA or anybody on the MTA board wants to contemplate or pursue.
If I could follow up, you had, and I know this was some time ago, the MTA had a prediction that as much as 60% of its ridership would return by the end of this year. Now we're hearing that ridership might not be back to normal until 2023. Can you talk a bit more about that and maybe what the MTA has learned in the last few weeks since New York started opening up about what your expectations should be about ridership returning?
Well, look, some things are unsurprising. The increase in bridge and tunnel volume is unsurprising. The same thing happened in other cities, including in Wuhan, where passenger traffic increased first. The increase in volumes on the commuter rails, frankly, has been lower than expected and disappointing. And we're running, obviously, a substantial amount of service. I took the Long Island Railroad 645 this morning, and as far as I could tell, everybody on the train had a mask, but there weren't a lot of people on the train. And Metro North is carrying even a lower percentage of its pre-pandemic traffic. We are reporting significant increases on buses. To what extent that is affected by the fact that on local buses where there's rear door boarding, customers aren't being required to pay, and what effect that is having, and what effect it'll have when rear door boarding is no longer in place. And then it's unknown factors like what happens in other parts of the country, and are some of those people returning to New York and creating a surge. Obviously, New York, New Jersey, Connecticut have made huge progress in stopping the spread and bending the curve, especially in New York State. But our fate is to some extent going to be affected by what people in other states and other parts of the country do, and whether they return. There are all sorts of factors that we will see how they play out in the weeks and months ahead.
And we move on to Andrew Siff of WNBC. Andrew.
Hi, everybody. Pat, you've used the expression financial tsunami several times today. Why are you not able to give us a sense of what the service cuts would be should you not get the federal help? For example, what subway lines might have to go away, what stops might have to be closed down. I know you don't want to alarm the ridership, but clearly you must have some kind of an emergency plan ready to go if this funding doesn't exist.
Well, look, the ridership and our customers should be concerned, right? Our focus right now is federal funding. The U.S. Senate is back in session. We're following that closely. We're doing everything we can. Obviously, the support of Minority Leader Senator Schumer is extraordinarily important. And we're not in a position to discuss with the public, because we haven't discussed with our board, which we will do first, any number of the unpalatable, unattractive options that are listed in that box on the bottom of slide 7.
But do those unpalatable options include fewer subway lines, fewer stations, fewer bus routes?
Well, look, Andrew, the horrible term service reduction is a reduction in service. That's not something that we want to contemplate, but the fiscal tsunami that we're facing is measured in billions of dollars, about $4 billion for the remainder of the year, and billions of dollars, $6.6 billion in 2021, and billions of dollars beyond that. That is not a deficit that we can cut our way out of it. Having said that, we have every obligation, and we're going through cutting overtime. We are going through consulting contracts. We're going through non-labor cost items. We are doing that. We've made substantial progress. We reported a $340 million number today. That's in addition to the $800 million in budget reduction and other cost cuts that are already in the financial plan for 2021. And I can assure you that the $340 million number will be higher. Work continues on it and is continuing on a daily, weekly, monthly basis.
We're going to stay in the room for the next question. Our pooler, Clayton Gusa of the Daily News. Clayton.
I have a few quick housekeeping questions, Pat, before I ask some other stuff, if you'll just bear with me. Who is currently the chair of the Transit Committee? Because have you selected a replacement since Sarah moved over?
We'll be announcing obviously we've had a number of board members join the board, Clayton, and we'll be announcing new committee assignments in the future.
Okay, and then is Craig Cipriano still in an acting role as head of buses, or is he permanently in that position?
He's not acting.
Okay, and then Pat Warren is now both MTA Chief Safety Officer and Chief Operating Officer of New York City Transit. Who does he report to, you or Sarah?
Sarah Feinberg, of course.
Okay, but as MTA Chief Safety Officer?
To me.
So, yeah. Okay. And then Sarah...
acting,
in
the case of the New York City Transit. Thank you, sir.
Just bear with me. And then Sarah, as interim NYC Transit President, reports to you or Mario Peliquin?
To Mario.
Okay. And then while Mr. McCord's in the room, we've done some coverage on him. You guys have cut 3,000 jobs in the past year. His department was supposed to be responsible for that. You said it's been on hold, his work. So I'd like to afford Mr. McCord the opportunity to just explain exactly what he has done and what he's doing at the MTA.
No. What we said at the March board meeting was that the transformation effort, because of the pandemic, was on pause. Anthony and his team have continued to work. They, for instance, on railroad procurements, commuter railroad procurements, have created efficiencies that will save $16 million over a period of time. The move at the Business Service Center to a paperless environment will yield savings in excess of a couple of $1 million over the next 18 to 24 months. Anthony and the transformation team have a goal by the end of the year of approximately 1,000 additional headcount reduction, which could include a significant amount of additional attrition.
Could Anthony speak to that?
I'm sorry?
Could Anthony speak to that specifically?
Sure.
Hi, thanks for the opportunity. So one of the things we're doing in transformation is we're shifting towards a shared services model. I don't want to get too technical here, but it's a way of sharing all of the skill sets we have across in the agencies to bring them all together to provide better services in a mutualized way. It's really a way of delivering the same or better services, obviously with fewer resources, but also more specialization, better skill sets, better competencies to be able to manage all the other costs and responsibilities we have across the MTA. That's what I can share with you right now.
Will you be making regular updates to the board moving forward? I know before the pandemic that was something you intended to do. Obviously, that's interrupted that.
Yes, there will be regular updates to the board, all of the progress we're making, the improvements we're making. One of the things I can share with you now, we have already consolidated functionally several of the areas of the organization. Functions that were in agencies are now mutualized, so all of the agencies can benefit from the strength of a larger MTA. And we'll be introducing some of the things that this allows us to do better at more economically as well, depending on what the next board is.
All right, we're going to move on. Next question is from Paul Berger of the Wall Street Journal. Paul.
Hi, Pat. How you doing? Hi, Paul. Can you hear me?
I can hear you fine.
Great. So I was just wondering, just following up on Andrew's question earlier, you said it wasn't possible to discuss the cuts, potential cuts with the public, because you hadn't yet discussed them with the board. I felt like today there was obviously some frustration amongst your colleagues on the board, A, that they didn't get this financial plan until a few minutes before the meeting began, but B, there seemed to be some hunger to actually discuss them today. In fact, Bob Lynn said, I think we need to discuss it right now. So why can't you discuss it with the board? Your money, the first bailout funding is going to run out within, 10 days or so? It's highly unlikely that you're going to get as much money as you need as quickly as you need it. So these guys, the board, they are the fiduciaries, right, of the MTA. Why can't you let them discuss it today?
Well, look, first, your premise is wrong, right? Everybody who attended a board briefing, a virtual board briefing, got a briefing that was very similar to the presentation that was made today. There were a couple of board members who couldn't make it. That was not the case of, but certainly Mr. Lynn and the others got it. One. The thing that we're focused on right now is reducing overtime, reducing consulting contracts, and non-personnel expense. We reported that number right now stands at $340 million. We haven't made decisions to implement that, but those are $340 million is a lot better. We are going to increase that number. I'm confident that we can do that. Having said that, we're not going to be able to cut our way out of that. And service cuts and reduction in headcount are the last things that we're going to contemplate. We're focused right now 100% on the federal funding, with the U.S. Senate being back in session, which would fund the revenue declines and the increased expenses from the virus through the end of 2020. and that's where things stand. I think we're approaching it prudently and candidly, and we'll be discussing all of these issues here internally and with the board in the months ahead.
And we move on to Michelle Caskey from Bloomberg. Michelle.
Hello. I have two questions. So wondering, especially if the federal aid doesn't come through or come through in the amount that you really need, in the full amount that you need, how soon would the MTA need to use deficit financing? How soon would the MTA need to start working on a bond sale to cover operating costs? My second question is, has the MTA, have you guys been in discussions with the state or state or city officials regarding any kind of new revenue streams, new taxes, in the event that, again, the federal money doesn't come through? There was, if I remember correctly, there was a board member, a couple of them, who suggested things. One board member was talking about a special gas tax.
Well, I'll defer to the CFO, Michelle, on your first question, and I'll handle the second one.
Okay, thank you.
As the chairman said, we're expecting, or we're requesting $3.9 billion from the federal government, and we said that that would carry us through the end of the year. As you saw in the financial plan, there's a little bit that's left over that would go to hit the deficit in 2021. But basically, we're talking about a number that is in the 3.2 to possibly 3.5 that we need this year. So if we find out that we're not getting the federal funds, we're going to have to probably do something this fall in terms of deficit financing. But again, that's not been approved by the board, but that would be the action we would probably have to take. So it's not going to be one thing in total that's going to solve our problems, because if we do sell deficit financing, we've got to pay for the deficit bonds. So in that case, we'll need to create room to do that. And that's one of the things that the savings that the chairman mentioned that we've identified and we will continue to vet and that we will try to increase could give us some of the room that we need to do deficit financing if that's what we have to do. But I would say deficit financing just takes financing away from our capital program. It is not a productive use of funds, but it is just a way of getting yourself out there and paying the bills. So,
on the second question, Michelle, I'd respectfully ask you this question. What's your view on an increase in the subway fare?
What's my view on an increase in the subway fare?
Yeah.
Given high. Since you're asking me personally, I must tell you, for the past couple years or so, I just ride a bike around town.
Got it. So here's what I'd say. Obviously, there's high unemployment in the city, there's high unemployment in the state, there's high unemployment in the region. Many people's economic security in the city, the region, the state has been terribly disrupted by the pandemic. The pandemic, while it's under control in New York State, is raging in other important parts of the country. And the concern about fare increases is one that we share here. A tax increase, and obviously the MTA is not a taxing authority, we don't have the ability to tax. A taxing increase imposed on those same people who are suffering high levels of employment and whose economic security has been completely disrupted would also, that would be burdensome to all of them. Which leads me to where we are. We are completely focused right now on trying to get $3.9 billion of federal funding. We think we had a webinar that some of you joined with 26 or 27 other transit agencies around the country, all of whom are in the same boat as the MTA is. Although our deficit is greater because we're larger and because we get about half of our revenue, for instance, from tolls and fares. So we're completely focused on getting the $3.9 billion. We're obviously aware that that is not a certainty, but we're doing everything we can to play every card we have to make sure that we've done everything to maximize the likelihood of getting federal funding, and that's what we're focused on.
All right, the next question is from David Meyer of the New York Post. David.
Perfect. Thanks, Tim. First is question for Pat and a question for Jano. For Pat, I'm wondering, you mentioned these $350 million in cuts yesterday. I didn't hear much today in terms of details and accounting for where those cuts are coming from, what exactly they are in the tangible sense. I'm wondering if you can either share that information or why it wasn't provided today to the board or the media. And then my question on the Second Avenue subway, in terms of the delays in approval from the Trump administration, I'm wondering if Jano can say, quantify the impact on the timeline in terms of delays to the final completion of the project, and tell us what, if anything, give us some insight into his conversations with the federal government about getting that approval and funding.
Yeah, so I'll take the first one, and Jano will take the second. We've got cuts of about, thanks. We've got cuts of about $340 million. That's a process that is in process. As I said, I expect that number to increase. It includes reductions in controllable overtime, consulting contract reductions, and non-personnel, non-service reductions from every part of the MTA, as I mentioned, from headquarters. It is a work in progress. We'll be discussing it with our board before we discuss it with the public and the media. I'm absolutely confident that the 340, 350 number will increase as work continues. And the goal to reduce as much as possible to the maximum dollar extent of our controllable cost in order to reduce the deficit is the order of the day and will continue to be the order of the day for a significant period of time. Jano.
So, David, the short answer to your question about Second Avenue subway is that we have been waiting for more or less a year for the US DOT to advance the application for federal funding to the next stage. We fulfilled all the requirements. We got a very high rating from their consulting team about our competitiveness for the grant. And that's been on hold, very much like Central Business District tolling, frankly. So I can't tell you what the impact of the schedule is going to be until we know when we're going to actually get it. But I will say this, in the meantime, what we're doing is we're continuing to work the project, and I want to compliment my colleagues at Transit, figuring out how do we make this project faster and cheaper when we do get to build it, because it is a great project that obviously is well overdue. We've been promising the citizens of East Harlem this incredible upgrade to their lives and their access to jobs and education for well nigh 70 or 80 years. So we have to get it done, but we're waiting for the feds.
And the next question is from Danielle Moyo of Politico. Danielle.
Hi, I have two questions, actually, if that's okay. The first one is I wanted to ask about the video of an officer punching a homeless man on the subway. So do you have a comment on the officer's handling of that? And also, it's reignited calls to reverse the hiring plan for 500 new cops. So is that something that's being considered, particularly in light of the new fiscal deficit numbers?
168 police officers have been hired. There's a hiring freeze in effect, except with respect to essential operating positions, but the hiring freeze includes, or covers rather, hiring additional police officers at that time. I saw the clip. The clip was very troublesome. Obviously, I don't know what happened before the clip started and what happened afterwards, but that conduct was abhorrent, and as I understand it, it's being investigated as it should be.
But still moving forward with the plan to hire new cops.
Well, no, what I said was 168 police officers have been hired. There's a hiring freeze in effect. That includes hiring additional officers beyond the 168.
Next question is in the room, back in the room here, Mark Hallam, AM New York, one of our poolers today. Mark.
Hey, Pat.
Hey,
I'm
Mark.
wondering if you guys have worked through any formulas to decide what kind of a fare increase would be necessary if the federal funding doesn't come through.
Well, we have not.
All right, short and sweet. How about we go to Paul Burton of Bond Buyer. Paul, you had your hand up?
Yeah. Yes. Hi, Pat. Can you hear me okay? Pat?
Yeah, we hear you, Paul. Go ahead.
Okay, good, thanks. This is about ridership trends and how they may have changed by time of day. Now, you referenced last week's webcast with all the different transit agencies, and I believe on that airing, Clarel DeGraff and PATH, for example, said that patterns have emerged such as essential workers riding early in the morning, say 6 a.m., and traditional office workers riding in her words, dribs and drabs. And I wonder what data the MTA might have, if any, to reflect patterns on its own system.
Sarah,
Hey there.
Hi, Sarah.
Hey, I think we're updating our ridership reports daily, so we get those numbers daily, and so you can sort of see the slow but steady uptick. It's a little bit uneven. I looked at the ridership from yesterday. It's a little bit below where it was last week, but goes up and down. I don't know if there was a more specific question or if you just wanted a little more. Oh, time of day. We're seeing particularly heavy ridership first thing in the morning, not surprisingly. A lot of folks who are out and about continue to be essential workers, and obviously the phase 1, 2, 3, 4 workers. So we're seeing a lot of, we're still seeing our rush hour be between 5 and 7, significant ridership from 5 to 7 in the morning, and then in the afternoon about 3 to 5. I myself was out yesterday between the hours of 5 and 7. A lot of construction workers, as you would expect, lots of folks in scrubs. So essential workers, construction crews, healthcare workers.
Thank you.
And we go on now to the New York Times, represented today by Christina Goldbaum. Christina, you're up.
Given this financial outlook and also given how quickly traffic has rebounded into Manhattan, is the MTA considering moving forward with an environmental review process for congestion pricing even before getting federal guidance?
Well, here's the dilemma we have. We would love to move forward with the environmental process. That's been our position since April of 2019 and the middle of April of 2019 when we had our first meeting with USDOT. We need a decision by USDOT on which environmental process applies. The EIS, for instance, requires ministerial action by USDOT before we can start it. It's fairly cynical in my mind when you think about it because congestion pricing is clearly an environmental good. It funds mass transit, it reduces congestion in the central business district, and improves air quality. And to hold it up on the pretext of an environmental process, which surely couldn't have taken 15 months to reach resolution, seems cynical. So we're eager to get started. We've been eager to start since April of 19. In addition, the parts of congestion pricing or central business district tolling that the MTA is responsible for have continued. They're on time and on budget, but there will reach a point where under federal law, we're not allowed to go any further. That's not next week, it's not next month, but it will be sometime later this year.
Okay, and then just another quick thing. Do you have an updated number for how many MTA workers have died from coronavirus and how many have tested positive?
The tested positive number, Pat Warren will come back to you. The fatality number continues to be 131.
All right, next up is Dave Colon from Streets Blog. Dave.
Hey, Pat, how you doing? Thanks, Tim. To go back to the question of the police, I know that you said that some of them have already been hired, but what is it that makes police hires so essential that they haven't been part of the initial round of cuts that the MTA announced? And then I have a follow-up after that.
All right, give me the last half of the question. I heard the first, I didn't hear the second.
What makes the police hires so essential that they haven't been part of this initial round of cuts that got announced in the last couple of days this week?
Well, look, as we've said, part of providing transportation, whether it's subways, buses, Long Island Railroad, or Metro North, is providing a safe and secure environment. That's part of what the police do. The primary responsibility, as you know, Dave, for policing the subways is the NYPD. Sarah Feinberg has been clear, and I share her concern about the pullback of the NYPD from New York City Transit, including with respect to the homeless initiative, and that is that is very troubling and concerning to us.
And then on that subject, if in a doomsday scenario, we don't get this federal money and cuts have to be made, or even cuts have to be made in general in the future, would the MTA scrap the hiring of the rest of these officers before they did job cuts for people like bus operators, train operators?
So Dave, just to be clear, we've hired 168. The hiring of additional police officers at this time is subject to the hiring freeze, period.
Okay, we're going to move on, but Christina, the answer to your question about total number infected, 4,098 to date, 4098, and we go to Jose Martinez with the city. Jose.
Hi, everyone. Can you, Pat, speak a little bit more specifically about the cuts, which we've heard mentioned a couple of times today, consulting cuts? Any specifics as to how deep they would go, where they would go, which companies, or is that just going to remain for now in generality?
Well, look, I can tell you without naming names and not in a position to do it, that the amount of the consulting cuts in 2021, and this is a work in progress, is approximately $140 million. That includes contracts that are being terminated. It includes contracts that are being scaled back. And the other thing I will say is I am confident that that $140 million number will grow.
Thank you.
Sure.
All right, next up, Danielle Moyo had a follow-up. I'm advised that we missed the follow-up question. Is that right, Danielle?
Yeah, sorry, I had a separate one. I just was curious. A month ago, the MTA started testing air filter devices. I was just curious, what came of that? Have they been added to all the trains, or I guess what were the findings?
Well, look, that work is continuing. We have shortened the replacement cycle for filters on subway cars. We're looking at other filters. We're also working with governmental agencies in terms of air exchange. The air exchange on the subway exceeds public health minimums. And we are very focused on the aerosol issue as we are focused on the virus on pieces of infrastructure on subway cars, buses, commuter rail, et cetera.
All right, we go to Christopher Robbins of the Gothamist. Then we're going to wrap it up today with Ben Cpoc. So, Chris, you are up.
Thank you. Hi, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to follow up on the revenue stream question. Let's say federal funding doesn't come through the way the MTA needs it to. Will service cuts and fare hikes come before the MTA starts lobbying for some sort of commuter tax or gas tax, or will the MTA cut service and raise fares before asking for some other dedicated revenue stream?
Look, we've said everything is on the table. Everything is on the table, period.
All right, Chris. Going once, going twice, and over to Ben Cpoc to take us home. Ben from 2nd Avenue Saugus. Go ahead.
Thanks, Tim. Pat, I know you've talked about how we haven't really talked about labor cuts, but is there any consideration to revisit a plan to transition to one-person train operations? I think some estimates say that could save up to $300 million a year, which would help at least reduce the reliance on federal funding.
Look, everything is on the table. There are collective bargaining agreements with our various unions that may have to be part of the discussion, but everything is on the table. We have not made that specific proposal to any union, and what we're now focused on is getting federal funding, 1, 2, reducing expense, overtime, consulting contracts, non-personnel, non-labor expense, and we're going to continue to do that. If the federal funding doesn't come through this year for 2020, or in 2021, the size of the deficit is going to require that everything be on the table. Things that are covered by a collective bargaining agreement, we have to respect, and they may be the subject of negotiation, which may be successful or not. And the unions, on behalf of their members, are going to have very strong positions on many of these issues. But as we've said, the box on page 7, slide 7, represents a list of alternatives, none of which, all of which are unattractive and unpalatable. But the MTA has never been in the financial crisis that it is in now in terms of order of magnitude. 40% of our revenue has disappeared in 2020 and 2021. That's extraordinary.
All right, thanks everybody for the reporters. If our poolers here have reports for you, we'll simply distribute them without editing. If we get them from the poolers, you'll get them from us. No edits, just their reports. Thanks everybody. Have a great afternoon.